100 years. I had been a slave for 100 years. And the funniest part, the part that still makes me laugh until it hurts, is that I did it to myself, on purpose, with a smile on my face. It started on Earth, where I was nobody. Broke college kid, rented a room the size of a coffin. My one real talent was grinding video games until the sun came up and my eyes felt like two dry raisins. And like every broke kid who ever stayed up too late reading cultivation novels under a blanket, I had the dream. Transmigrate, land in another world, get a cheat nobody else has, become invincible, and then, someday, slap some arrogant young master so hard his great-great-grandfather feels it in the family tomb. You know the dream, don't lie to me, you've had it too, so I died. Boring death? Don't ask, it's embarrassing, and it did not involve saving a bus full of children or pushing anyone out of the way of a truck. It involved a staircase and some poor life choices. That's all you're getting. And then, against all odds, against everything I actually believed deep down, I woke up. New body, new world, and there, floating behind my eyes where nobody else could see it, a genuine, honest-to-God system. It introduced itself as the longevity modifier, version 1.0. Version 1.0, even the name sounded overpowered. I could already taste the invincibility. It was going to be a fruity taste, like victory and also like those energy drinks that turn your tongue blue. The thing offered me a starter pack, 3 choices laid out like a menu. A little welcome gift, it said, to launch my glorious protagonist career. The first 2 options were boring, a comfortable start, a decent inborn talent. Safe stuff, beginner-friendly stuff, nothing that made my gamer soul stand up and salute. But the third one glowed. Of course it glowed. The overpowered one always glows. Reincarnation, die and come back. Keep every scrap of cultivation you earned. Forever, infinite lives, infinite patience, infinite retries. And my genius brain, my beautiful, doomed, sleep-deprived gamer brain, went. Why be a flashy prodigy who burns bright and flames out in 300 hours, when you could be the grinder who logs 3 million hours and never once rage quits? Why show off once, when you can outlast literally everyone who ever mocked you, sleep for 10,000 years if you feel like it, and wake up to shock the entire world? A true man, I told myself, standing tall in the theater of my own head, chooses reincarnation. The universe heard that, and the universe said, lol. No refunds, buddy, because here is the fine print nobody read to me. Nobody so much as mentioned it. This world I'd landed in wasn't some clean fantasy kingdom with taverns and quest boards. It was stuck somewhere around the Xia and Shang era of my old one. Bronze weapons. Bronze morals. A slave world. And in a slave world, if you were not born noble and you were not born free, then you were not a person. You were livestock that happened to talk. You were an asset with a face. And my random reincarnation, it turned out, had a favorite setting. That setting was rock bottom. Every single life, every single time, I opened my eyes at 17 years old, in a slave's body, at the very bottom of the deepest pit the world had to offer. First life I got lucky, relatively speaking. Plowed a field for 20 years, kept my head down, died of a plague that swept the whole province. 20 years, that was my good one. Second life, my owner didn't believe slaves counted as people at all, not even a little. So at some harvest ceremony, he cut my throat and offered me up to the gods. Like a chicken. Like a nice fat chicken. I lasted 7 years that time. Third life, I was worked to death on a levee before I turned 30, and I mean that literally. They worked the body until it stopped, and then they rolled it into the river to reinforce the wall, which is a thing they did with slaves who died on the job, so that even my corpse had to keep laboring. Fourth life, a famine, and my owners fed themselves and did not feed us, and that was that. Fifth life, I actually made it to 40, which felt like an achievement, right up until a young master needed a body to test a new poison on. And it just kept going, and going. Sixth, seventh, eighth. Whips, curses, hunger that becomes a personality trait, a thing you stop noticing the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. The occasional creative execution when a master got bored on a slow afternoon. 10 lives, 100 years. No mountain seclusion, no showing off. No arrogant young masters getting slapped by a hidden dragon. Just dirt and pain and counting the years like a debt someone else was collecting. I cursed that starter pack every single day. Everyone. I made an art of cursing it. And the cruelest joke of all was the modifier itself, because it was incredible. It had functions that could break the whole world in half, genuinely game-ending stuff. And all of it, every last button, was locked behind experience points. And experience points, my hard currency, my one way out, came from exactly one place. Surviving, 1 point. Per year, that's it, that's the whole faucet, drip, 1 year, 1 drop. Drip, I tried everything else, believe me. I got creative. In one life, I assassinated the biggest man I could physically reach, a village chief type who beat his slaves for sport, hoping the system would pay out some kind of kill bonus. It paid out nothing, not 1 point. In another life, I seduced a slave owner's extremely unfortunate-looking daughter, gambling that maybe, there was a hidden romance quest buried in there somewhere with a reward at the end. There was no quest. There were instead 2 of the most creative punishments of my entire 100-year career, and I would rather eat the bronze sword than describe them. So eventually I stopped being clever, and I did the one and only thing the system actually paid for. I stayed alive. And I counted the years like a prisoner scratching lines into a wall because that is exactly what I was. Which brings us finally to now. Life number 10, 17 years old. Technically, the 100 years of misery had already carved this particular face into something that looked closer to a hard 30. And I was sitting in the corner of a room that was, and I want you to understand I mean this with complete sincerity, a livestock pen. 6 of us in it. 1 straw mat between us. And my 5 roommates were having the very specific kind of conversation you have when you already know you're being marched to the front line of a war in the morning. I heard the Eastern barbarians eat raw meat, one of them whispered. Drink blood straight like animals. That's right, said another, hugging his knees. I heard they eat people, whole. We're not coming back from this. Even dead, there won't be enough of us left to bury. The old one, a sly, thin-faced man the others called Iron Root, let out a long sigh. Said we should have run days ago, back when there was still a road out. Too late for that now. Once slaves like us hit the border, he said, that's the end of the sentence. There's no rest of the story, and me. I sat in my corner, and against every last rule of common sense, against a full century of hard-won pessimism, I felt something bright and stupid flicker to life in my chest. A spark of excitement. Because after 1 entire century of eating dirt, of dying badly, of watching that faucet drip 1 measly point a year, my modifier had finally ticked over to 100 experience points. And I had just spent every single one. Let me show you exactly what 100 years of savings buys a man in this economy. My character panel, please. Name, Y. Chen. Age, 17, with about 90 in the tank before this body clocked out. Origin, slave. And the system, ever so helpful, ever so eager, had added a little subcategory under that. Ant, just ant. Spiritual root, miscellaneous, which is the worst kind there is, the tofu scraps of spiritual roots. The dented can bin, and my aptitude and my comprehension, both of them freshly, gloriously upgraded. All the way up, from very poor. To poor, that's the whole upgrade, that's it. Garbage promoted to slightly less garbage. 100 years of savings, 100 experience points, gone in a single blink, and the reward was that my 2 worst stats went from the bottom rung to the second from bottom rung. Cool, very cool, love that for me. My inventory was 3 slots wide. That was another thing the modifier gave me, a little pocket in reality that only I could reach into. And in those 3 slots I kept the sum total of everything I owned across 10 lifetimes. 1. A bag of millet, 40 kilos of it, because somewhere around my 3rd life I learned the hard way to always keep your food where nobody can take it from you. 2. A bronze sword lifted off a body in my 5th life. And 3. The crown jewel of my entire existence, a single bamboo scroll, the Po Lu divine skill. A real cultivation technique. The absolute lowest possible grade of real cultivation technique, yes, but real. Which I had obtained 15 years and 1 life ago by creeping up on a young master while he slept and quietly, permanently ending his cultivation career, and then walking off with his book. Was the book any good? No, it was so bad it came with a warning label. The scroll basically opened by apologizing. This technique, it said, right there in the first lines, has no magic to it. It will not extend your lifespan. It will not hoard spiritual energy for you. Your power under this art peaks at 30 years old and then declines every single year after until you're weaker than the day you started. If you have any other option, it said, any talent at all, any other path, do not waste your best years on this garbage. Signed, sincerely, and with what I imagine was a heavy sigh, the man who wrote it. For anybody else on the planet, that warning label kills all interest stone dead. Nobody sane trains a body that starts falling apart at 30. For me, it was scripture. It was a love letter. Because I had, at long last, after 100 years, understood the single most important fact about how this world actually worked. And I had, sitting right there in my inventory, a body-refining technique I could genuinely learn. One that did not care in the slightest about my trash spiritual root, because it didn't use spiritual energy the fancy way at all. It just made the body strong. Peaks at 30 and then declines. Buddy, sweetheart, I have infinite bodies. Time is the one resource I own by the truckload, in bulk, wholesale. Give me the technique that everybody else in the world throws directly into the trash. I'll take it, I'll take the whole dumpster, and I'll thank you for it. Across the mat, the youngest of us, a 16-year-old the others called Strong Branch, watched me reading and sneered. Amazing you can still read a time like this, he said. What's even the point? We're all dying at the border, you not scared or something? I set the scroll down. Palmed it back into the inventory in the same motion, smooth enough that not one of them saw a scroll vanish out of a slave's hand. And I said, calm as a pond, we missed our chance to run. It's too late to be talking about it now. That got Iron Root's attention, because I could read, you see, and reading meant I was not pure cattle. Reading meant I might be useful, and useful is a currency even at the bottom. He shuffled over, introduced himself all polite, asked my name. Just call me Chen, I told him, and he got even more polite after that, bowed his head a little, called me Brother Chen, which told me precisely how far I could trust him. Which was not at all. Here's a thing I've learned across 100 years of the bottom. A man who bows lower the second he decides you're useful is not being kind. He's doing arithmetic. He's already working out, right there behind his polite little smile, exactly how much he can squeeze out of you before you're gone. I'd met 100 wheat fields. I'd be proven right about this one inside a week. I filed that away. I have a very large file. I didn't get to enjoy my shiny new character panel for long. The door banged open. A soldier stood in it. Bronze armor, which meant a free man, which meant he could do anything he wanted to any of us and answer to no one. He didn't say a word at first. He just booted Strong Branch hard into the corner, purely for the crime of not getting out of the doorway fast enough. Then he delivered the news that rearranged all 6 of our fates in one breath. You're in luck, he said, and I already felt the but coming the way you feel weather coming. The war with the Eastern barbarians is suspended. A few years at least, you won't die at the border. He paused, and there it was. But you're still useful. So pack up. Tomorrow you march, west of Jai City, to the mines. Half the room actually cheered. A couple of them dropped to their knees and thanked the gods out loud, weeping for this great and merciful blessing. Not the front line, anything but the front line. Only Iron Root went pale and sick and quiet, because Iron Root was old, and every slave alive knew the mines killed men before 30, just as surely as the barbarians would, only slower and in the dark. And me, I sat very still, and I felt that stupid bright spark in my chest catch and grow into a small, warm flame, because I had a feeling in my gut. A strange, unfamiliar feeling I had almost forgotten the shape of. A feeling that after 100 years of absolutely nothing, my luck was about to turn. I had no idea how right I was. The march took a full day. 1,000 of us roped together at the neck in a long shuffling line, wretched, filthy, and completely identical, herded down a dirt road like the ants the system kept insisting we were. The soldiers walked it easy, bored, whipping stragglers back into line the way you'd swat flies off a cart. Nobody talked much. There's not much to say on a walk like that, when everyone's doing the same private arithmetic about how many years the mines take off a man. Somewhere in the middle of it, Iron Root made one last pitch to the few slaves shuffling near him. His voice low, urgent, pitched under the tramp of feet. Cut the rope some night, he whispered, all of us at once. Scatter into the hills before they can react. Freedom, he'd clearly been chewing on it for days, working up the nerve, and now with the mines ahead it was now or never. Nobody bit, not one, because we all knew the truth of it the way you know your own name. Escape is a bedtime story slaves tell each other to feel warm. Every slave in this world is branded, marked in a way that follows you to the grave, and I personally had tried running in 3 separate lifetimes. All it ever buys you is the special privilege of dying alone in the wilderness, hunted, instead of dying in a pen with company. So we walked, and we arrived. And I got my first look at the mine. And the instant I stepped through the mouth of it, I understood exactly why my gut had been screaming at me all day. There was no darkness inside. That was the first wrong, wonderful thing. The walls glowed, soft and cool and steady. Fluorite lamps hung at intervals down the tunnels, made of the same rare glowing stone I had only ever seen once or twice in my entire century, and only ever behind the walls of a rich man's estate. And then I saw what all 1,000 of us had been dragged here to dig out of the ground. Ore, dark blue ore, veined through the rock, warm to the touch when I brushed my fingers over a chunk of it, humming with something I could feel in the roots of my teeth and the back of my skull. Spirit stone, a whole mountain of spirit stone. I actually stopped walking when I understood what I was looking at. The soldier behind me shoved me forward, and I let him, but for 1 second I just stared, because a slave who spent 100 years dreaming of a single chip of this stuff does not expect to be marched into a cathedral of it. Out in the wider world, one fist-sized chunk of this could bankrupt a wealthy family that had spent 3 generations getting wealthy. One chunk. And here were the walls made of it, floor to ceiling, glowing, humming, going back into the dark farther than the lamps could reach. It was money and it was power, and it was the raw fuel that every cultivator on earth would kill their own relatives to get more of. And here I was, a starving slave in a rope collar, standing inside an entire cavern of it. They shoved a bronze pickaxe and a wooden bucket into my hands and told me the number. 5 bowls a day. Dig up 5 bowls of ore a day or get beaten until you did. And here is the truly cruel part, the part that is almost funny. To me, this filthy, airless, propped up with prayers, collapse-any-second death trap of a mine was paradise. It was the single most beautiful place I had stood in 100 years. Because there was more raw spiritual energy packed into this pit than most real cultivators, licensed, trained, free cultivators, get to touch across an entire lifetime. And I couldn't have a single drop of it. Because I was a starved, weak, rope-collared slave, and the exact instant I sat down to cultivate instead of dig, an overseer would beat me flat for slacking, and that would be the end of life number 10. All that power, all around me. Glowing in the walls, humming in my teeth, and I could not reach out and take one drop. The work itself was a special kind of misery, and I'd sampled a lot of kinds. The tunnels were low, so you swung the pick half-crouched, and the ore was hard, and the veins didn't give up their treasure to a starved man with a dull bronze tool. All around me in the cold, glowing light, hundreds of other slaves swung and grunted and coughed, and the foremen walked the rows with clubs, and the only sound was metal on rock and the occasional wet thud of a lesson being taught. A man 2 spots down from me collapsed before midday and didn't get up, and they dragged him out by the ankles, and nobody paused, because pausing came out of your own quota. The first day I dug up 2 stones. 2, the foreman came by, looked in my bucket, and punched me square in the face for underperforming, hard enough to snap my head sideways. Then he promised very sincerely that the next punch wouldn't be nearly so friendly. I ate my dinner, which was a single bowl of gray, salty, gritty porridge that tasted like a puddle. I lay down on the stone in a body that ached in every joint I owned. And in the dark, I did the one productive thing a slave can do. I thought, and by the time the shift bell rang the next morning, I had found the loophole that changed everything. Here is what happened. The day before, on a whim, I had tried to shove a raw chunk of spirit stone straight into my inventory. Just to see, and the system had spat it right back out at me. Item too large, it said, which made no sense at all because the chunk was the size of my fist, and my inventory happily held 40 kilos of millet. And then, lying in the dark, it made sense. The system still thought that chunk was attached to the vein, attached to the whole mountain. It wasn't looking at a rock and seeing a rock. It was looking at a rock and seeing an entire mountain range and going, yeah, that's not going to fit in your pocket, genius. So the next day I got to work with my little chisel. Cut a groove, test it, try to store it, denied, cut deeper. Test, denied. Cut until a piece was hanging on by almost nothing, until the system finally saw it as its own separate object in the world. And it slid into my inventory with a soft little chime. I sat there in the glowing dark and grinned like an absolute idiot. 100 years. 100 years of the system spitting my ideas back in my face, of dead-end schemes and creative punishments, of 1 point a year and a locked panel full of buttons I could never press. And here at the bottom of a mine with a chisel and a rock, I'd finally found a crack in the world that ran my way instead of against me. It's a very particular feeling, finding your first real exploit in a game that's been cheating you the whole time. It tastes like getting away with something. Because think about what that meant. Think about it. I could chisel a stone half-free in a fraction of the time it takes to hack it all the way out. Pop it into the inventory. Pull it right back out again a second later, now counting as fully mined, clean and separate and ready for the bucket. I could skip half the actual labor of the job. Half my day freed up, handed back to me. And I knew, down to the marrow, exactly what I was going to spend that stolen half-day on. I scouted the tunnels until I found what I wanted. A dead-end crack, a little side fissure the diggers had abandoned, the kind of gap only one skinny, half-starved man could fold himself into. I stacked a few loose rocks across the mouth of it so no passing overseer could see in. And then, hidden in a crack in the wall in a slave mine at the bottom of the world, I did the thing I had waited 100 years and 10 lifetimes to do. I sat down cross-legged. I took a chunk of raw, warm, humming spirit stone in both hands, and I cultivated. Spent my whole life making other people rich, I said quietly to the stone in my hands. I think it's about time I enjoyed a little treasure the slave owners can't even afford. Now. If a real cultivator, a proper one, had walked in on me right then, he would have screamed. He'd have fainted. You are supposed to have a spirit-gathering formation to help you draw the energy in cleanly. You're supposed to have a calm, empty mind. Good feng shui. Careful, patient, respectful technique. You are supposed to sip the spiritual energy like a man dying of thirst who has been told this one cup is all the water left in the world, one careful drop at a time, wasting nothing. Me, I grabbed the whole cup and poured it down my throat. Raw ore, filthy with impurities. My body absorbed maybe 20% of what was in it and threw the rest away, and worse, took real damage from all the junk it choked down in the process. Did I care? A man dying of thirst does not run a purity test on the puddle. He does not check the water for parasites. He gets down on his stomach and he drinks. And it worked. By the time the shift bell rang again, the ache had left my body entirely. Every joint felt loose and oiled and strong. I felt better than I had felt in 100 years in 10 bodies, and I mean that with no exaggeration. I pulled up my panel with a shaking hand. Cultivation level, none. And then right there in front of my eyes, in soft, glowing letters, none became level 1 of the Kai refining realm. 100 years of being nothing, of being an ant, of being livestock that could read. And in one single afternoon, folded into a crack in a wall in the dark, I finally, officially became a cultivator. I could have cried. Instead, I laughed very quietly so nobody would hear. And then I went back out and filled my bucket because paradise still had a quota. Then, of course, the vultures showed up, because they always do. You put treasure anywhere in this world, even in the hand of a slave who can't spend it, and the vultures find it by smell. On my way out of the tunnels that same day, 3 slaves stepped into my path and boxed me in. The leader was a giant by our standards, a full head taller than me, with shoulders like a doorway, and 2 lackeys flanking him with mean little darting eyes. The giant dropped a heavy hand on my shoulder, almost friendly, almost. "Kid," he said, "hand over 1 ore, just 1. Losing 1 out of your bucket won't kill you, and we'll let you walk, fair deal." Now, on any normal day, I'd have handed it over without a word. 1 stone is not worth dying for, and a smart slave picks his fights the way a starving man picks his meals, rarely and only when it counts. But this was not a normal day. I only had 4 stones in the bucket, and if I turned in 3 at quota tonight, 1 short, I would be the one they stripped and made an example of in front of the whole camp. So I looked up at this mountain of a man and I said, "You want ore? There's a whole mountain of it right behind you. Go dig your own." He blinked. He had come here expecting a slave's frightened, lowered eyes, the quick nod, the fast surrender. He got something else instead, something flat and unafraid looking right back up at him, and for about half a second it genuinely rattled him. Then his face closed up. "Fine," he snarled. "Then we take it, river, manure, teach the new kid some manners." And because even thugs think about resale value, don't touch his face. "Foreman docks us if the merchandise looks damaged." The tunnel was too tight and low to swing properly in, 3 bodies against one in a crawl space. It got ugly fast and it stayed ugly. I was strong now. Stronger than a normal man, stronger than I had any right to be after 1 day of stolen cultivation. But strong is not the same as skilled, and I was not yet a fighter. I was just a hard thing to hurt. And 3 bodies in a stone gap is 3 bodies no matter how strong you are. I broke the giant's grip off my shoulder and put one of the lackeys down with an elbow. But the other 2 kept getting a boot into my ribs, a fist into my kidney, and the low ceiling kept catching my swings and cramping my elbows. And slowly, grindingly, the sheer arithmetic of 3-on-1 wore me down. The sharp edges of the ore in the walls opened little cuts across my arms and cheeks that nobody was even aiming for. It stayed a bloody, gasping stalemate, nobody winning, until the giant started worrying that the noise would bring an overseer down on all of us, and pulled his men back. I kept my 4 stones. I also kept a face full of shallow cuts. And on the way out, the foreman punched me anyway, right on schedule, for being 1 stone short of quota, because of course he did. But the part that stayed with me, the part I carried out of that tunnel, came later, at dinner. They brightened the fluorite lamps for the occasion, turned the whole yard the color of cold daylight so that every last one of us could see clearly. Then they dragged out old Iron Root, stripped him naked in front of the entire camp, and whipped him for low output. For being old and slow and digging too little. And I sat there in the crowd with my wooden bowl in my hands, gripping it so hard the wood creaked in my fingers, watching them turn an old man's pain into an after-dinner show for 1,000 people. Some of the other slaves laughed, not because it was funny. It was the nervous, ugly, wheezing laughter you make when the whip is landing on someone else's back, and you are so relieved, so shamefully relieved, that tonight it isn't you. I didn't laugh. I just made a promise. Quiet. Private, sitting there in the crowd with my creaking bowl. Someday I was going to burn all of this to the ground. Not today. Today I was a starved slave 1 bowl short of quota, and the road was far too long to see the end of. But someday, this whole beautiful, glowing, humming machine that ground men into ore money and called it order, I was going to take it apart with my hands. I didn't know yet that it would take me the better part of 200 years. If I had known, I'd have made the same promise. Some promises are worth the wait, however long the wait turns out to be. I filed that feeling away too with all the others. I was building quite a collection. A man could furnish a house with the things I'd filed away. After that night, I got strong. Fast, everyone else in that mine was breaking their body for 2 bowls of porridge a day. I was drinking raw spirit stone by the bucket, in a crack in the wall on my stolen half-day. There is no contest between those 2 diets. There never was going to be. 4 days, that's all it took. 4 days and the Po Lu divine skill hit its first level of great perfection. Second layer of Kai refining. My cuts healed overnight now. My body filled out, and then it started to harden, muscle turning to something denser than muscle. I could feel it happening, like slowly turning to stone from the inside. And the 3 extortionists, the giant and his 2 lackeys, they suddenly discovered they had very urgent business in some other tunnel every single time I walked past. Funny how that works. And then, on the 7th day before dawn, 2 slave soldiers dragged me up out of sleep by the ankles. They were weak, genuinely, embarrassingly weak. I could have thrown either one of them clean through the ceiling and gone back to sleep on the warm spot. But I was curious more than anything, so I let my face go slack and terrified, let my knees wobble the way a real frightened slaves would, and let them haul me across the dark camp to a private barracks. To a man the soldiers all called Lord Hu. Young, a real cultivator, maybe 20 years old. And as I was about to learn very personally, a man who fought with blades of wind. And standing there in his barracks, waiting for me, arranged like a little welcoming committee, were my accusers. The 3 thugs from the tunnel, and delightfully old Iron Root. They had reported me for stealing ore. Now, technically, true. I was absolutely stealing ore, more of it and more cleverly than they could possibly imagine. But here is the beautiful, load-bearing detail about false accusations in a slave world, the rule that was about to save my life and end 4 others. If the accused man proves his innocence, then the accusers receive the exact punishment they'd wanted for him. And these 4 had come here wanting me dead. "Renegade servant Chen," Lord Hu said, before I had even finished lowering myself to my knees. He had a bored, cruel drawl, the voice of a man who had never once been told no. "You dared to steal ore. Then you must be tired of living." "Steal ore," I said, keeping my voice small and confused. "From where, my lord, who could steal ore out of a guarded mine with soldiers at every mouth?" "I don't have that kind of ability, I'm just a digger," Iron Root actually sighed at me, a long, sad, grandfatherly sigh like he was disappointed in my manners. "Just accept it, boy," he said gently. "I had no choice. I had to report you. Don't hold it against me now. Don't hold it against me." I looked at the old man who had shared my mat, who I'd told my name to, who had called me Brother Chen with his head bowed, and I understood him completely all the way down. He wasn't cruel. Cruel would have been easier to forgive. He was worse than cruel. He was scared, and he had done the math, and he had decided that my death was a fair price to pay for one more year of his own life. "The four of them accuse you together," Lord Hu said, examining his own fingernails. "Prove your innocence, or you'll be offered up as a sacrifice to the gods. So, where is the ore?" "I really didn't steal anything, my lord," I said. "But if they want to accuse me, shouldn't they at least find the evidence first? Or do we just believe any story any man tells now? Because I've got a few stories of my own, if that's all it takes." The giant couldn't stand it. He shoved forward and searched me himself, roughly, his big hands patting me down, ripping at my rags, checking the seams, the waistband, everywhere. "Iron Root swore you had nowhere to hide them," he muttered, more and more frantic as his hands came up empty. "They are on you. They have to be on you. Use nothing." Of course nothing, because everything I owned in the world was tucked away in a pocket of reality that did not exist anywhere these men could reach or search or even imagine. "Iron Root," the giant snapped, going gray now. "What's happening? Where is it?" "Don't panic," Iron Root whispered, and he was sweating through his rags. "He can't hide it forever. It'll be on him or back at my place or in his." The side door opened, and a slave soldier walked in, bowed to Lord Hu, and said the words that ended 4 men's lives. "My lord, we searched the slave Chen's sleeping area and the old ones and the whole surrounding tunnel. There's nothing, no ore anywhere." "Because there was nothing to find in the first place," I said helpfully. And that was the exact moment the giant's entire world fell out from under him, because he understood, finally, all at once, what a failed accusation meant. The crime he'd accused me of carried death, so the false accusation carried death. His death. He spun and grabbed the old man by the collar and hauled him up onto his toes. "You've killed us, old man," he screamed into Iron Root's face. "Do you understand? You've killed all of us." "Impossible," Iron Root whispered, staring at nothing at all. "I saw it. I saw the ore in his hand. I saw it with my own eyes." Lord Hu had heard enough of the farce. His right hand came up and then came down in a small, lazy, chopping motion, almost like he was shooing a fly. And I felt the wind gather in the room, a sudden cold coil of it, and then a thin, invisible blade of it whistled across the barracks, and 4 bodies dropped to the floor and did not move again. The giant, the 2 lackeys. The old man, just like that, over a rumor, over a lie that hadn't even worked. And I stood there, hands still bound, and watched 4 men end because a bored young cultivator had waved his fingers. I felt something cold and permanent settle into place inside me. It wasn't grief. They'd come to watch me die. I wasn't going to insult us both by mourning them. It was more like a final understanding, a last piece clicking home. This was the world these people had built top to bottom, brick by brick, and there was no floor to it. No bottom to the cruelty. You could always go lower. A slave could betray a slave. A soldier could behead 4 men mid-breakfast, and somewhere above all of them sat a king who'd murder his own father for tidiness. All the way up, all the way down, the same rot, wearing nicer clothes at the top. I filed that away too. I was going to need it, much sooner than I thought. Then Lord Hu had the bodies dragged out and the room cleared, and the 2 of us finally had the real conversation. "You," he said, "have the ability to get ore out of that mine, some trick, some technique. Don't bother denying it to me." "Impossible, my lord. They framed me. We had a conflict in the tunnels, that's all. They wanted revenge." He smiled, and it was not a nice smile. It was a smile with a transaction behind it. "I don't care how you do it. I genuinely do not care. I don't even care if it's real magic or a clever hand. Here is what I care about. Here is what's real. You are going to produce ore for me, quietly, every night, or I am going to put you down like a pig. Slow, over a very long afternoon. Those are your 2 futures. Pick one." And here is the thing that Lord Hu did not understand about himself, standing there being so terrifying. If he could actually kill me for free, if my death cost him nothing, he'd have done it already. He would not be standing here monologuing. Men who can simply take a thing, take it. They don't negotiate for it. A man who threatens you instead of just acting is, without exception, a man who needs something from you. And I already knew exactly what Lord Who needed, because a few minutes earlier, kneeling on his floor, I had read a letter lying open on his desk, upside down, in the time it took him to gloat. There was an assessment coming. 1 month out. Pass it, and he'd be promoted to centurion, a real officer with a real future. Fail it, and he'd be demoted or shipped home in disgrace to a family that had spent good money on his commission. He didn't just want spirit stone to line his pockets. He was drowning without it. He needed a miracle in 30 days, and I had just walked into his barracks looking exactly like one. So I did the one thing that a slave, anywhere, ever, absolutely never does. I negotiated. Fine, I said. I'll bring you ore, good ore, and plenty of it, but I want my own room away from the others, and I want rest days, 2 out of every 5. He exploded. He came off his chair and grabbed me and slammed me down onto the floor, and he laid a hand blade of wind against my throat, and I could feel it, thin and cold, sharp enough to open me right up if he leaned on it. But I could also feel his grip, and his grip was weak, thin, nowhere near as strong as all that bluster made it sound. So I lay there on his floor with a blade of wind against my windpipe, and I looked up at him and I smiled. Go ahead, I said, kill me. And then go lose the only man alive who can pull treasure out of that mountain for you right before your assessment. Good luck explaining the empty ore to your superiors. Good luck going home. He held there for a long, long moment. The wind hummed against my skin so close I could feel my own pulse against it. Then he let go. Because of course he did. Here is a lesson I have paid for many times over. When you are useful to a small man, you squeeze him. You take everything you can get right there on the spot while your usefulness is fresh. Because he will never once thank you for handing yourself over for free. He will only despise you for being a fool who didn't know his own worth, and he will use you up and throw you away, and he'll feel clever doing it. And the very instant I sealed that deal, lying on the floor with my new terms agreed, my modifier chimed behind my eyes. Achievement unlocked. Take a small step forward. 100 experience points awarded. I almost laughed out loud, right there on the floor with a soldier standing over me. Because there it was. There was the trick, the real one. The one the system had been sitting on, smug and silent for 100 years. Not killing. I'd tried killing. Nothing, not grinding ore, not 1 sad point a year. The thing that paid out, the thing that had always paid out was this, changing my status. Changing my station, clawing upward, even 1 single inch from slave toward not slave. The cheat had wanted me to climb this whole time. It had rewarded the first real step instantly, generously, 100 points in 1 chime. And across 10 lifetimes of watching me get whipped in the dirt, it had never once thought to mention this. Not a hint, not a footnote. It just sat there and watched and let me suffer and waited for me to figure out the rules of a game it had never bothered to explain. Inhuman little thing. I loved it and I hated it in the exact same breath, and I have never fully stopped doing either. I spent the 100 points on the spot, dragged my aptitude up another whole rank. My lifespan ticked down as I did it, 90 in the tank dropping to 86, the bill coming due for gorging on raw impure ore. And I did not care about that either, not even slightly. What is one body's lifespan to a man with infinite bodies stacked up behind him? Spend it. Spend it all. There's always another. So began the strangest business partnership of my 10th life. Every night I brought Lord Who ore, and every night without fail he stared at it like a man staring at a pile of gold, breathing hard through his mouth, practically drooling on it, and I understood for the first time just how starved even the free men were for this stuff. A fist of spirit stone could bankrupt families out there in the sunlight, and here I was, a slave, handing him bowls of it in the dark. I tried exactly once to get something real out of the arrangement. Something that mattered. Lord Who, I said, all humble, eyes down. It's clear to me now that only cultivation matters in this world, and I don't want to be a slave forever. Could you teach me a technique? Anything, even a scrap, and I'll be loyal to you, truly loyal. Forever, he laughed in my face, genuinely laughed. You, a bastard slave like you thinks he can have my techniques. I don't need your loyalty, boy. What would I even do with it? And then, generous as ever, he listed my options for me. I could become a slave soldier and go die on some battlefield in exchange for a crippled, third-rate army technique. Or I could castrate myself and go be a eunuch in some noble's house and pray every day to get noticed by someone important. Those were my roads. Or I could keep serving him, and maybe, if I was very good, he'd remember me when he was great. Translation from the top: bleed for me for free forever and get absolutely nothing. So I stopped asking nicely, and I started making demands. My own room, better food, my rest days honored. He screamed every time. He threatened every time. And every time I called his bluff, told him flatly to kill me and lose his ore, and every time he folded, because folding was the one thing Lord who was truly excellent at. Within a month I was a house slave, which meant a private little room near his barracks, and far more importantly, it meant time. Uninterrupted, unwatched time. Time to sit in the dark and cultivate. And the second I got that room, the modifier handed me another 100 points, and my life got quietly, dangerously, wonderfully better. The arrangement settled into a rhythm, and the rhythm was its own strange education. Every night after the shift bell, I'd walk to Lord Hu's barracks with a bundle under my arm, and every night he'd send his own guards out of the room before he'd let me open it. Just the two of us and a lamp. He didn't want anyone seeing where his miracle came from. Which suited me perfectly because I didn't want anyone seeing either. He got greedier every single week. It's the nature of the thing. The first month, a bowl of ore made him weep with relief. By the third, a bowl made him frown and ask why it wasn't two. I'd bring more, and the more I brought, the more he needed, the way a man who finds a spring in the desert stops rationing and starts building a bathhouse. He started skipping his own duties to cultivate on my ore. He started jumping at shadows, convinced a rival would find out and take his supply. He was drowning in wealth, and it was making him paranoid, and I watched all of it with great interest, because a man's greed tells you exactly where the handle is to pick him up by. There was one bad night early on that taught me how thin the ice was. A superior officer came through the camp unannounced, a real one, a centurion checking on his squad leaders, and he walked into Lord Hu's barracks while I was still standing there with a half-open bundle of raw spirit stone at my feet. I felt Lord Hu's whole body seize up beside me. If the officer looked down, saw the ore, asked the one obvious question, the whole thing came apart, and I'd be the loose end that got cut first to protect the secret. So I did what a slave does. I dropped to my face on the floor, fast, knocking the bundle under the low cot with my knee in the same motion, and I started blubbering about how the merciful Lord who had caught me stealing table scraps and was about to punish me, oh please, oh mercy, made myself pathetic. Made myself boring. The officer's lip curled at the sight of a groveling slave, and he lost all interest in the room, said something about Lord Hu wasting his evening on cattle, and left. Lord Hu let out a breath like a punctured wineskin, and then, because he was who he was, he kicked me once in the ribs for scaring him and told me to get out. I filed that away too. Not the kick, the lesson. Looking weak isn't a defeat, it's a tool. The most powerful tool a hidden man owns is the whole world's certainty that he's nothing. I'd been handed a whole talent built on it, back in the ashes of the mine, and here in Lord Hu's barracks I was learning to swing it by hand. The rest of my hours I spent in my little room, cultivating and feeling the body change under me one careful degree at a time. It's a strange thing to feel yourself hardening from the inside. First came the muscle, packing on until I outgrew 2 sets of rags. Then the muscle stopped growing outward and started turning inward, denser, heavier, the flesh going from strong to actually tough. There was a morning I caught my own hand on a jagged edge of the door frame, a cut that would have opened a normal man to the bone, and I watched the skin dent and hold and not break, and I sat down on the floor and just breathed for a while. Because I had spent 100 years being the softest thing in every room, and now, quietly in the dark, next to a man who thought I was a faucet, I was becoming the hardest. 3 years passed like that. Lord Hu passed his assessment on the back of my ore and became a real centurion, an actual officer, an actual Lord Hu instead of a young man playing at it. And being freshly important, he started sending me things. Proper cushions to sit on, little absorption aids to help me draw energy cleaner, better food, because a happy blood donor gives more freely, and he'd figured out that much on his own. So I took his cushions and I climbed. Po Lu Divine Skill, 5th and final level, the 10th layer of Kai refining. The very peak of everything that garbage manual could give a man. My body changed as I climbed. First it swelled, packing on slabs of hard muscle until my old rags didn't fit. Then, as the technique turned from raw strength toward defense, it started to harden instead of grow, getting denser, heavier, tighter. Ordinary blades began to feel like fingers poking me. A club felt like a friendly pat. I was becoming a weapon, quietly, in a private little room next to a man who still thought I was a faucet he'd cleverly installed. And then the mountain came to collect its debt. I was in my room on a rest day doing absolutely nothing when the whole world dropped an inch and then boomed. The mine had collapsed, and it was not nature that did it. It was greed, plain and simple. The owners had crammed something like 10,000 men into an unsupported death trap to squeeze out more ore, faster ahead of some quota of their own. 10,000 people, gone in the space of one long breath, buried alive in the dark under a mountain of the very treasure they'd spent their short lives digging out of it. Because they'd done the sum, the owners. A support beam costs money. A slave costs nothing, and there are always more slaves. So the beams never went in year after year, and one day the mountain did what mountains do to men who insult them. It came down. If I'd been on shift that day instead of in my room, I'd have been one of the 10,000. Just another number in a collapse, a rounding error in someone's ledger. And you will never in 100 years guess the very first thing Lord Who did. Before the dust in the tunnels had even settled, before anyone had counted the dead, he came to my room to kill me, because a dead mine meant a useless slave. And a useless slave who knew all his little secrets, who'd seen him drool over stolen ore, was not a slave anymore. He was a loose end, a witness. He came in already narrating it, the way small men do when they've finally got the upper hand and want to enjoy it out loud, how he'd cut off my legs first. Drag me around the camp by the hair as an example. Cut off my arms next. Stuff what was left of me down a urinal to finish. He'd clearly rehearsed the whole poem in his head on the walkover. And then he gathered up a blade of wind thicker and longer and meaner than anything I'd ever seen off him. 3 whole years of his own careful growth compressed into it, and he swung it across my chest with everything he had. It left a scratch, that's all, a shallow pink line. On a body 3 years hardened by a technique he'd been too proud to hand me. 3 years of him drooling over my ore. 3 years of me drinking the mountain. And this was the gap it had opened between us. You should have seen his face. I've been given a lot of gifts across 11 lives. Techniques, talents, a cheat that rewrites reality. None of them landed quite like watching Lord Who look down at that little pink scratch and understand, all at once, exactly how badly he'd misjudged the faucet. It was worth the whole 3 years, every bowl of ore. Impossible, he breathed, staring at the scratch. My wind blades cut clean through bronze armor, that's not. I stepped in and closed both of my hands around his throat, and I told him the truth, slow and clear, so he'd have time to really hear it while the light went out of him. You're too weak, Lord Who. You've spent your whole life only ever cutting things weaker than you. And somewhere in there you started to believe that made you strong. He kicked. He clawed at my wrists. His arms and legs flailed around in the most undignified way, all that dignity gone in a second. So I loosened my grip just a little and gave him one last chance to say something useful to me. To offer resources, to beg with something actually worth taking. Instead he wheezed this. This is impossible. I've reached the 6th layer of Kai. Your body, a slave's body, it can't possibly withstand. Useless to the very end. So I asked him the only question I actually cared about, and I asked it as I squeezed. 3 years, Lord Who? A whole mountain of spirit stone delivered to your door every single night, and your cultivation is still this pathetic. What have you even been doing with it all? Why are your eyes closing? Are you feeling sleepy? His head drooped. His hands fell away from my wrists. His whole body went slack and heavy. And I dropped him on the floor like the object he had always treated me as. I searched the body. And I found a real prize tucked into a hidden fold of his robe. A parchment holding a high-grade technique, the essence refining wind control art. A genuine wind cultivation art, worlds above anything a centurion should have owned, probably itself stolen or granted from above. I slid it into my inventory. Then I picked up his own dropped sword. And because subtlety was over, because there was no more hiding after this, I opened a line across my own palm, and I used my blood to write a single sentence across the cover of that garbage Po Lu manual, the manual that had carried me here, and I left it on the floor beside him. Slave owners will eventually pay a bloody price for their arrogance. Remember that line? Write it down. It's going to matter for a very long time across more lives than this one. Then I walked outside. And the soldiers were already there. A ring of them around my little room. waiting for reinforcements before they came in because word had spread that the Orslave had killed a centurion barehanded. And I understood, standing there in the cold morning air, calm as still water, that I was not going to walk out of this camp alive. And you know what? That was completely fine. Because in 100 years and 10 lifetimes at the very bottom of the world, I had never once, not a single time, seen a slave fight back. Not really. Not stand up straight and swing. And I wanted just once before this body was done to be the one who did. In a world where slaves never ever did, so I did. Slave, a slave centurion bellowed at me across the ring. You're surrounded, on your knees, kneel and it'll be quick. Kneel. 100 years and it was always the same word. Every life, every master, kneel and it'll be quick. Kneel and it'll be easier. Kneel and maybe I'll let you live a little longer in the dirt. I had knelt more times than any man alive. I was, you could argue, the most experienced kneeler in the history of the world. I did not kneel, I accelerated. I hit their line before the last word had even finished leaving his mouth. Slave soldiers threw themselves in front of their centurion with leveled spears, and the spears snapped against my hardened body like dry autumn twigs, one after another, and I cut 2 men down with the bronze sword and took the centurion's head off mid-sentence. You lackeys, I told his body as it dropped. You deserve this most of all. You wore the collar and licked the hand anyway. And then it got sad in a way I did not expect and did not enjoy. One slave soldier broke and fell to his knees in front of me, hands up, weeping. For the sake of all the slaves, he begged, spare me, please. I just want to live, that's all, I just want to live. And I gave him the only answer I had. The 10,000 men who died in that mine this morning, they just wanted to live too. Did anyone spare them? And then the others started up. And this right here, is the part that wrung the last drop of pity out of me and left it dry. Because they did not beg me for mercy, they begged me to die. If your death saves the rest of us, why won't you just die? One shouted, and others took it up. If you'd accept it quietly, none of us gets punished for letting you run. Can't you have a little compassion? We all want to live, and there's a whole group of us and only one of you. It's simple arithmetic. Just die, a whole group of them, standing there doing the arithmetic of my death out loud, weighing my one life against a whipping they might avoid. What do you do with people like that? People so thoroughly broken that they'll do the master's work for him for free and call it reason. There's only one thing you can do. I was right in the middle of teaching them that particular lesson when the sky opened up, and a fireball the size of a house came straight down out of it and swallowed me whole. 2 real centurions had finally arrived. Bronze ghost masks over their faces, the mark of ranked cultivators. One a fire type, one water. And the fire one had taken one look at the situation and decided to simply end the whole rebellion from a safe, comfortable distance. The slave soldiers standing near me who caught the edges of that fireball went down screaming, rolling on the ground, and not one person moved to help them, because they were only slave soldiers, not worth a single drop of anyone's precious spiritual power. Their screams went on for a while. Then they stopped. Through the roar of the flames, I heard the fire centurion tell his partner that the slave was surely ash by now, and they should put the fire out before it spread, because he didn't want to hold up a handful of soot and try to call it the rebel. He was wrong about the ash. My level 4 body could eat those flames, for a while, not comfortably, but it could. So I came walking out of the fire like a burning man, blind in one eye where the heat had taken it. Half my face melted into something out of a nightmare, teeth bared where lips used to be, and I crossed the distance and punched the fire centurion clean across the yard. His partner, the water type, panicked, and then he made the single dumbest decision I have ever personally witnessed on any battlefield in any of my lives. He blasted me with water, which put out the one and only thing that was actually hurting me: amateurs. Both of them, ranked, masked, free-born amateurs who'd spent their whole careers pointing spells at slaves who couldn't fight back, and never once learned what to do against something that could. The water one looked at his own hands, then at me, standing there steaming and healing, and I watched the exact moment he understood that he'd just helped. "You think you can kill me?" I said, and my voice came out of that ruined face wrong, low and twisted, monstrous enough that I heard it myself and understood why the water one flinched. "You slaughter your own slave soldiers for fun and call it tidying up. You call us ants? Well, let's find out if a couple of transcendent immortals like you two can die here in the dirt right alongside the ant. And I fought, past the point where the body should have quit. Past the pain, past the blindness, past all of it, until it finally gave out with my fist buried in one of their chests and the both of them down and still. And that was the end of my 10th life. The official history I found out much later in a much later life gave me a name, the renegade servant Chen. It said I had murdered my kind benefactor, the noble centurion lord who had generously taken me in. That I had killed one commander, maimed another, and slaughtered 814 loyal soldiers of the kingdom before finally dropping dead of exhaustion. It called me a monster. A rabid dog that bit the very hands that had fed it. They rewrote the whole thing top to bottom. The slavers were the tragic victims. The slave who fought back was the villain of the piece. Which? Fine, I've been called worse things by worse people, and at least this time I earned it. And then, as this body cooled in the ashes, the modifier settled the account. And for the first time in 10 lives, the numbers made me sit straight up. Survival, 3 years. +3, mentioned in the official histories, +300. Achievement, a slave's wrath makes blood flow for a mile, +300. Multiplier for dying badly, torn up and burned instead of peaceful, times 1/2. Final total. 302 experience points, 300. From a single death, after a whole century in which each entire life had earned me a sad little fistful of single points. It turned out that infamy paid. It paid extremely well. The system didn't care whether the world remembered you as a hero or a monster. It only cared that the world remembered you at all. And because I had cracked 300 points in one single settlement, a bonus dropped. A random starter gift pack, the same kind the modifier had teased me with on day 1 and never given me since. I opened it, lying there dead in the ash of my own rebellion, and what came out was so perfect I actually laughed. Alone, dying. In the ruins of the camp I'd burned. A talent, conceal Kai, the power to fake the cultivation level I showed the world. Anyone who wasn't dramatically, overwhelmingly stronger than me would see exactly, precisely, whatever level I wanted them to see. No more, no less. The system had just handed me the single most protagonist-shaped ability in the entire genre. The hidden dragon, the underestimated young master, the trash who's secretly a monster who lets the arrogant fools swagger right up close before he shows them the truth. Every cultivation story ever told runs on this one trick. Every single one. And it had been handed to me in an urn of my own ashes as a consolation prize for dying ugly. 100 years too late to be a gift, and exactly on time to be a weapon. I'd spent a century wishing I looked stronger than I was. Now I could look weaker. And I understood, dying there, that weaker was worth 10 times more. I set my displayed level to 0, absolute bottom, nothing at all. Then I spent the rest of the points raising my comprehension and dragging my origin up one more notch, off the very floor. And I lay back in the wreckage of my 10th life, and for the first time, the words that had felt like a curse for 100 years felt like something else. Felt like a door. Initiate reincarnation. The world went dark and warm, and I went looking for door number 11. Door number 11 opened onto a line of men shuffling forward in the dark, me somewhere in the middle of it, and a body that felt subtly, deeply, unmistakably wrong in a way I couldn't place for the first few seconds. The memories came the way they always come. A cold flood behind the eyes, and then suddenly I knew this whole life without having lived a day of it. This body was named Yang Kai, not a slave, technically. A servant, which in the slave-happy south of Yin country is a distinction without much of a difference. You're still property, you're still branded, you just get a nicer word on the paperwork. Yang Kai's father had been a free man with 3 sons. The eldest, Yang Guang, inherited the family's free status and immediately, energetically, gambled the whole family straight into a pit. So to climb back out, he sold the second brother off to be a eunuch. And when that second brother got lucky, landed a real palace post, started sending money home, big brother Yang Guang looked around at his one remaining brother, did some quick and cheerful math, and sold him too. Which is how I came to be standing in this line, a castration line. And when I reached down discreetly to confirm the horrible suspicion that was forming in the back of my mind, I discovered the truly special part of this particular reincarnation. This body had already been cut. Wonderful. Perfect. My glorious 11th life, my fresh new start, and I had spawned directly into the aftermath. A eunuch pre-installed, batteries not included. I very nearly turned around and reincarnated on the spot, right there in the line out of pure spite, just to inconvenience the modifier, just to make a point to a system that couldn't hear me. But I made myself breathe, and I made myself think, because I had finally, in the ashes of the mine, learned the one real lesson this world had to teach. For a man born at the very bottom of Yin country, there were exactly two roads to real cultivation. Road 1. Become a slave soldier, march to war, and earn the crippled, third-rate techniques the army grudgingly hands out to its cannon fodder. I had walked that road last life. It had earned me 800 corpses, a burned-off face, and a villain's name in the history books. I was not eager to walk it twice. Or Road 2, get close. Get close to the people at the very top, close enough to touch what they touched. And the people at the very top, in a paranoid dynasty ruled by a paranoid king, trust exactly one kind of servant near their treasures and their secrets and their beds. The kind of servant who can never, ever father a rival dynasty of his own. The kind with nothing to pass down and no reason to plot for sons he'll never have. So, a eunuch. The universe gives, the universe takes, and every so often the universe takes something extremely specific and then hands you the career path it just opened up. The man ahead of me in line was big, broad, honest-faced, and remarkably cheerful about the whole thing. His name was Su Yu. He told me, laughing at his own bad luck, that his own grandfather had been the one to send him here for the good of the family. So I wasn't the only one in this line who'd been traded in by his own blood like a worn-out tool. We were both just here, he said, grinning, to make something of ourselves, to make our names. I liked him immediately, which, in hindsight, looking back across everything that came after, should have been my very first warning. I have famously, catastrophically terrible instincts about people I like. Then the reason for this whole gathering strolled in through the far doors, and the air in the room changed temperature. The Crown Prince, Wen Chen, 16 years old and already close to 8 feet of him, handsome enough to make grown men shift on their feet and grown women forget their husbands, 6th layer of cultivation at 16, gifted at absolutely everything he touched. And he had come here in person, to a room full of fresh eunuchs, to pick out his own servants by hand. Because his father, the king, had built an entire power base decades ago on the backs of loyal eunuchs, had used them to slaughter a treacherous minister and 600 officials in a single night, and the boy wanted the same trick in his own pocket. But he didn't just want pretty, obedient servants. He wanted servants who could actually help his kingdom, servants with a gift, so he'd brought along the one man in Yin who could see a gift before it bloomed. The Grand Diviner, Bao Kai. A man who read a person's entire fate off the cracks in a scorched tortoise shell. I watched that diviner decide life and death with single, offhand sentences. He'd point a bony finger at some trembling eunuch, squint, and pronounce him harmless, and the man would be led off to serve in a warm palace. Or he'd point at the next one, tilt his head, and call him a scourge upon the nation, and that man would be dragged away screaming to be sacrificed to the gods the following month. A living, breathing person with a mother somewhere. Filed under sacrifice, because of the shape of a crack in a shell and the mood of the man reading it. Then the prince stopped in front of me, and the diviner laid his hand on the shell. And I got ready to die well, because I had already decided calmly that if this man called me a scourge, I was going to make myself into the single biggest scourge that tortoise shell had ever prophesied. I'd give the crack something to be about. Instead, he frowned and looked again and said, "Your Highness, this one will bring great benefit to great Yin." I almost laughed in his face, because I knew precisely why. He was reading my aptitude, which I had personally, manually, cheat-edited upward over 10 lifetimes. And it was so wildly, impossibly out of line with my garbage, miscellaneous spiritual root that it broke his whole reading in half. He thought he'd found a hidden dragon in a eunuch's body. He had actually found a man with a doctored character sheet, and no way in the world to tell the difference. He was going to spend a good long while confused about me, and I was going to spend that same while quietly, hugely enjoying myself. So I got picked. Along with 30-odd others, we were herded off to the prince's residence and tested properly, one by one, on the tortoise shell for our spiritual roots. They lined us up and read us like livestock at a market, and the readings sorted us on the spot into the useful and the disposable. My cheerful friend Su Yu went before me and lit up the reading as a rare 3-root genius, and the whole room cooed over him and marked him for great things, a real find, a jewel. He caught my eye afterward and grinned, still the same big honest-faced man from the castration line, still just here to make his name. I grinned back. I still liked him. I'd go on liking him right up until the afternoon he ran a golden sword through a man's back and I put a halberd through his heart. My instincts, as established, are a disaster. Then it was my turn, and I came up, as always, as trash miscellaneous root with inexplicably brilliant aptitude. The diviner stared at the shell, then at me, then at the shell. A garbage root that should have produced a garbage cultivator, married to an aptitude that belonged on a hidden dragon. The two numbers didn't go together. They couldn't go together. He'd never seen anything like it because there had never been anything like it, because one of the two numbers was real and the other one I'd bought with a cheat, and no tortoise shell ever forged could tell him which. It delighted absolutely no one and confused the poor man even further. The prince took one look at that result, sneered, and declared that a body cultivator eunuch would be nothing but a laughingstock on any battlefield, a joke in a suit of armor. And then, half out of contempt and half just to get me out of his sight, he ordered me shipped off to train under someone called Old Chen. A dying old eunuch, one of only 2 survivors of the king's legendary 7 eunuch guards from a war a decade gone, living now in forced retirement, with a very large and very well-known grudge against the throne he'd bled for, which is how I came to meet the single most important person in any of my lives. The Grand Diviner himself walked me out of the palace to deliver me, a great honor in theory. The man who read fates for the crown prince, personally escorting a lowly new eunuch to his training. And the second we were clear of the gates out of anyone's earshot, he showed me his real face. He shook me down. Those 3 spirit stones a month the prince had allotted me for my training, he'd be taking those, thank you very much. I'd deliver them to him personally every month on time, and wasn't he a generous man for letting me keep breathing while I did it? He smiled at me the whole time, a warm, fatherly, rotten smile. I said, "Of course, my lord." "Absolutely, my lord." And I made a firm, quiet, permanent decision right there on the road to never hand this vulture a single stone as long as I lived, not one chip, not one flake. Then he dropped me at Old Chen's front gate and left again, fast, walking a little too quickly, like the address itself made his skin crawl. The place looked haunted, genuinely textbook haunted. A huge estate once grand, now gone all the way to weeds and cobwebs. Leaves piled knee-deep in the courtyard. Years of them, rotting into black mush under my feet. Every window dark and dead. Every window except one. A single lit room, dead center in the sprawl, glowing like a held breath. I want to be clear. If this had been a story, I was the fool the audience yells at. Big empty haunted mansion. One light on, gate hanging open. Every instinct a sane man owns says turn around. I did not turn around. I never do, it's a character flaw. I knocked on the gate. Nobody came, I knocked again. Nothing, I pushed, and the gate swung open on nothing, unlatched, groaning on its hinges. And I walked into what looked precisely like the opening scene of a horror story, the kind where the audience is already yelling at the idiot to turn around. Right up until a sharp voice cracked out of the dark. "Who?" A man walked out of that one lit central room, and every single hair on my body stood straight up on end. He looked maybe 30, tall, hard, broad through the shoulders, still even in retirement, imposing in a way that had nothing to do with his size. And I, who had felt exactly 0 fear standing in front of the crown prince and his fate-reading diviner not an hour before, felt genuine, cold, animal danger crawl up my spine for the first time in 100 years. If he'd had a beard, I'd never in 1,000 years have guessed this man was a eunuch. He didn't look cut, he looked carved. This was Old Chen, Chen Long, and my instincts and my character panel agreed for once on exactly one thing about him. This man was, right now, this very moment, dying by inches. His strength was leaking out of him a little more every single day, draining away like water out of a cracked jar. And he was still, even dying, even fading, the single most dangerous person I had ever stood next to in 11 lives. He didn't want a disciple. He made that clear in the first 30 seconds. He wanted a servant, nothing more. Clean the house, cook morning and evening, go out and buy the meat, keep your mouth shut and your hands to yourself. That was the whole job, which was completely fine by me. A quiet corner and endless free time is a slave's private definition of heaven, and I had that high-grade wind control art off Lord Who sitting in my inventory that I hadn't so much as had the chance to open. So I cleaned. I swept a decade of rotted leaves out of his courtyard until the sun went down and my hands blistered. I cooked 3 plain, honest dishes and set them on his table. And when I turned to go eat my own portion standing up in the kitchen, the way a servant does, he waved me back. "Sit," he said. "Eat, it's just the 2 of us out here in this tomb. Forget the rules." I want you to understand how strange that was to me. How completely, disorientingly strange. 100 years, 10 lifetimes, and not one owner, not one master, not one free man in all that time had ever once told me to sit down and eat at the same table as him. He asked about my family while we ate. I told him the truth because there was no reason not to. "My brother sold me," I said. "Both my brothers got sold, and the man who sold us kept the money. I owe that man nothing, and I'll spend nothing mourning him." And Chen Long nodded, slow, chewing, and said something I did not see coming from anywhere. "Well said. The eldest with no sense of responsibility, packing his own brothers off to be cut one after another to cover his gambling. A brother like that." He shook his head. "It's better to treat him as a stranger. He was never really your brother to begin with. Blood doesn't make a brother, standing by you does." He treated me, from that very first meal, like a person. And in this world, at the bottom of it, that was the rarest thing I had ever been handed. Rarer than spirit stone, rarer than a cheat. I'd been given power before, and pain, and 100 kinds of misery. I had never once been given a chair at the table. A year passed like that. I cooked his meals. I swept his tomb of a house. I walked to the market and bought his meat and never once skimmed a copper off the change. And in secret, in my little room at night, I made absolutely no progress at all on the wind control art. None. Because the art needed spirit stones to fuel it, and I did not have a single one because the prince's residence had, exactly as I'd feared, completely and totally forgotten that I existed. No stones ever came. No wage ever came. If old Chen hadn't been feeding me out of his own thin pocket, I'd have simply starved to death in his weeds, a body cultivator with no body left to cultivate. And in that whole long quiet year, exactly one thing happened. And then, all at once, on the same afternoon, 3 things happened. The Grand Diviner came back for his spirit stones, furious that there had never been any. He'd finally worked out that the reason he'd received nothing for a year was that I had received nothing for a year, and somehow, in the twisted math of a small, cruel man, that made it my fault. He threatened me on the doorstep, named the things he could do to a friendless eunuch. And barely an hour after he'd gone, this body's second brother turned up. Yang Hu, a palace eunuch himself, the one who'd gotten lucky, come now to guilt me, his newly found little brother, into sending money home. To the family. To the same eldest brother, Yang Guang, who had sold the both of us to the knife. He stood in Chen Long's ruined courtyard and talked about family, and the Can clan rising again someday, and our nephew's great talent, and how a few spirit stones could give the boy a real start. And I stood there and looked at this soft, hopeful, deluded man, and I thought, we are not even men anymore, you and I. They took that from us with a knife to make us safe to own. And here you stand, still dreaming about the family name, still trying to fund the very man who did this to us. I told the diviner no. I told the brother no. And I braced for the price of it, because saying no is a luxury that costs you dearly when you live at the very bottom. And then the courtyard gate opened behind me, and old Chen walked out into the afternoon light. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He looked at Yang Hu and told him flatly that Yang Kai was his disciple now. That nobody, brother or diviner or prince, interfered with the choices of a disciple of his. And Yang Hu, who did not dare offend one of the king's old eunuch guards even in his decline, went pale, bowed, and slunk off out the gate. The diviner, I later heard, stopped coming too. Disciple. He'd said disciple. Then old Chen turned and walked me back through the estate, to a back courtyard I'd never once been allowed into in a whole year of sweeping the place. He unlocked it, and it was a full weapons yard, racks of halberds and blades, training posts, a packed dirt sparring ground. And he told me plainly, without any drama, that he'd been watching me the entire year. Every errand, every conversation. Every coin of change I brought back. Because I didn't know, he said, whether the crown prince had planted a spy in my house, or whether you were really the friendless outsider you looked like. And what do you think now? I asked him. I gave you my money for a year to buy my meat, and you never once skimmed a single copper. All year except this one afternoon, you had no contact with anyone from the palace. You don't wander off. You don't gossip. You keep to your room. He looked at me, really looked. And when a diviner and your own blood brother came to milk you, you told them both to go to hell rather than let them use you. A man like that. He shook his head slowly. A man like that can never be made into a royal lapdog. And a royal lapdog is the only kind of man this palace makes. So you're either broken in a way I can use or you're something I've never seen. Either way, I want you. That was it. Not that I was clever. Not that I was strong, that I had a spine and I wouldn't bend it for a bribe or a threat. He asked me, would I be his disciple? I knelt before he'd finished the sentence. And then, kneeling there, he told me why he hated the throne he'd bled for. And it was the oldest, ugliest, most familiar story in the world. He'd risen as a royal eunuch guard, one of 7, and he'd won more glory for Yin on the battlefield than any free-born general alive. And for that crime, that exact crime of being too good, 10 years ago the king had sent him and hundreds of his men on a deep strike far behind enemy lines. A grand mission, a great honor, that was really an ambush, a quiet execution dressed up in medals. The Eastern barbarian chief and his brother had been waiting for them, tipped off, ready. Chen Long's entire legion of eunuch cultivators was slaughtered in a valley. The enemy chief leveled up on the strength of all those corpses, crowned himself a king, and founded a whole new country in the east on that single massacre. And Chen Long came home. Not to a hero's welcome, to a nation that had decided to blame him for the defeat, for the very ambush the king had sent him into. He was retired in disgrace, given this rotting mansion, and left to sit in it year after year waiting for the day his strength faded far enough that the king would finally feel safe enough to have him quietly killed. To be a servant, he told me, and to be unable to be blindly loyal. To have a mind of your own, that is the single greatest sin in this king's eyes. Remember that. It's the sin they'll kill you for too if you let them see it. Then he picked up a bronze halberd off the rack, one carved along the shaft with a killin, an old friend from 100 battlefields, and he showed me what a real cultivator could actually do. He struck the ground once. Plain. No technique, no spiritual energy, just the swing, and the packed earth cracked open in a line. Then he struck again, and this time I felt spiritual energy gather and wrap the blade, and the ground didn't crack. It erupted. A crater a full meter wide blown out of the yard, like a cannonball, had dropped straight down into it, dirt raining back down around us. And I, who had spent an entire century believing that the Po Lu divine skill had made me strong, that I was a monster, that I could tank fireballs and strangle centurions, finally understood that I had been a child waving a stick around in the dark. Master, that's incredible, I said, and I meant every syllable of it. Then, being me, I immediately grabbed a halberd off the rack to try it myself. Disciple, wait. Too late. I slammed the halberd into the ground exactly the way he had, with everything my hardened body had. And the shaft snapped clean in half, because it was an ordinary military-issue halberd, not a cultivator's weapon, and I had just discovered, in front of my brand-new master, that raw strength with not one shred of skill behind it mostly just breaks its own tools. He looked at me for a long moment. This monster of raw, stupid, untrained power, standing there holding half a broken halberd like an idiot. And I watched him decide, right there behind his eyes, that he was going to enjoy the next few years enormously. So I started over, from absolutely nothing. The body control art, 33 layers of it, a profound rank technique good enough to carry a body cultivator all the way to the edge of the next realm. The Northern Land halberd technique, to teach me how to actually use the ox strength I'd been squandering for 100 years. How to hold a blade, how to move my feet, how to hit a thing without breaking my own weapon on it. And for the first time in 11 lives, I had a teacher. Chen Long taught the way a real master teaches, which is to say, the very first thing he did was demolish my confidence, brick by brick, on purpose. He had me spar him. I came at him with everything, all my hidden strength, 100 years of hardened body, every ugly trick I'd learned in the mines. And he neutralized every single clumsy swing without breaking a sweat or moving his feet more than he had to. And then, when he was bored of it, he took me by the front of my robe and planted me face first into the dirt of his own training yard. And laughed. Genuinely delighted. You have the raw strength of a monster, he said, holding me back up by the collar. And the fighting skill of a drunk toddler on a boat. It's honestly a little bit beautiful. I've never seen anything so strong be so useless. Fair, completely fair. Then he grabbed my wrist in one hand. Break free, I couldn't. I pulled with everything I had, and this dying old man's grip was a mountain around my wrist, immovable, patient. And there was the whole lesson right there in one hand. Strength without skill is a weapon that nobody, including you, knows how to hold. I'd been winning every fight of my whole existence by the single crude method of being harder to hurt than the other man. I had never once in 100 years actually learned to fight. So I learned, and it was slow, and it was humiliating, and it was the best time I'd had in a century. In 3 months, I broke the first layer of the body control art, and old Chen started quietly, without saying so, to take me seriously. He also flatly refused to let me keep starving on scraps while I trained. He dragged me back to the prince's residence himself to demand the spirit stones I was owed, 1.25 years of them. And there, in front of everyone, we learned exactly where my stones had gone. A fellow eunuch named Zhuo Ming had been quietly embezzling my entire monthly allotment the whole time. Tipped off that I was a forgotten nobody would miss it from, by my cheerful old friend from the castration line, Suyu, who had gone cold and arrogant and superior in the year since, now that he was a marked genius, and I was a joke sent off to a dying man's house. The prince, mildly annoyed at the mess, made them pay it all back, 45 spirit stones all at once. And then Chen Long called in a very old favor, and brought into my life the last thing on earth I ever expected to see again. His old friend Zhu Shen. One of the surviving 7 guards, like Chen Long himself. He came to set up a proper spirit-gathering formation for me, so that 1 spirit stone would give me the cultivation of 1.5. And I stood there the whole time he worked, watching his face, trying to place it, because something about him rang a bell so deep and so old I couldn't find it. Until all at once it clicked, and the floor dropped out of my stomach. This was the Imperial Guard from my last life, the fire-masked one? No. The one I'd punched in the chest with my dying, burning body in the ashes of the Mine Rebellion. The last man Wei Chen, the evil servant, ever touched. And he had absolutely no idea. He was telling Chen Long about it, right there, right in front of me, while I poured his tea with a steady hand. About the mad mine slave who'd rebelled a few years back, out west near Jai City. The one who'd killed a centurion bare-handed and left a blood letter behind that said slave owners will pay a bloody price. The one whose single dying punch had cost him, Zhu Shen, 2 full years of recovery laid up, his cultivation regressed. He shook his head at the memory of it. Such a monster, he said. Burned beyond all recognition at the end, one eye gone, face melted, still swinging. He'd never seen anything like it. And then he sipped the tea I had just poured him and thanked me for it and asked if there was any more. My mortal enemy from one life had become my junior martial uncle in the next. And he was, at that very moment, kneeling in the dirt of the yard, building me a cultivation formation with his own 2 hands, out of loyalty to my master. I have never, before or since in any life, kept a straighter face than I kept pouring that man his 2nd cup of tea. And so I settled into the strangest, best decade of 11 lives. Every morning the halberd, every evening the meal at the shared table. Chen Long drilled me the way a whetstone drills a blade, without mercy and without malice, and he never once let me get comfortable. The day I finally broke his grip on my wrist, the grip that had been a mountain 3 months before, he didn't congratulate me. He just grabbed the other wrist and said, "Now this one." The day I landed a clean hit on him in a spar, the first ever, he sat down in the dirt where I'd knocked him, laughed until he wheezed, and then swept my legs out from under me from the ground and told me never to celebrate mid-fight again, because celebrating is just a fancy word for stopping. And in the evenings, when Zhu Shen came by, the 2 old guards would drink and argue about battles 50 years gone, and I'd sit and pour and listen. My old mortal enemy and my beloved master, laughing together over rice wine, neither of them with the faintest idea that the quiet disciple filling their cups had once, in another body, killed one and terrified the other. It was the most absurd, warm, impossible thing. 2 old men who'd been left for dead by the country they bled for, and me, a man left for dead by the universe itself 11 times over, and for a few years the 3 of us made a strange little family out of a rotting weapons yard. Chen Long knew I had a secret. He'd said as much. He never once pried at it. "A man's earned his secrets," he'd say, and change the subject. And that, more than the halberd, more than the body control art, is the thing I've carried out of that decade across every life since. Not the technique. The chair at the table, and the master who let me keep my secrets and taught me anyway. 10 years vanished the way years do when you finally have a teacher and an endless supply of spirit stones. I climbed to the 18th layer of the body control art. To the 3rd layer of foundation establishment, the realm above Kai refining, which I reached on foundation pills Chen Long bought me quietly out of his own old savings. My borrowed body turned 28, and Chen Long, at 65, faded a little more with every passing season, exactly as the throne had been patiently waiting for him to, all these years, like a man watching a candle and holding a snuffer. And then the old king died, and the real story of this life finally started. It was a masterpiece of a murder, genuinely, and I had a front row seat to it. The old king, Lei Su, had been sick and bedridden for 11 long years, and his loyal imperial advisor, Guo Ping, had finally, after all that time, found a supplementary technique that cured him overnight. Just like that, at the triumphant court celebration held to mark the king's return to health, in front of the whole assembled court, the freshly cured king suddenly vomited a mouthful of black blood that hissed and corroded the floorboards where it landed. And the crown prince, my prince, Wen Chen, drew his sword on the spot and accused advisor Guo Ping of poisoning his father with a fake cure. Soldiers swarmed the hall. Guo Ping barely escaped with his life, fleeing the palace, screaming the whole way out that it was a conspiracy, that the poison had never been in his technique, that the real problem was certain people. Certain ambitious people, including, he screamed, the crown prince himself. He was right, of course. It was all Wen Chen, every bit of it. The king's eldest son, the real heir, who had conveniently gone mad from cultivation deviation a few years back. The second son, mysteriously killed by Eastern barbarians on a hunting trip. And now the father, poisoned at the exact moment a cure made him look healthy enough that no one would suspect poison. All of it, one after another, quietly clearing the path for one very filial, very patient son. The dying king figured it out, right there on the floor, choking on his own black blood. Too late. He cursed his murdering son to his face in front of everyone and promised to wait for him in hell, and then he died, ending a reign of 75 years. And Wen Chen's very first act as the true power in the palace was to have every servant who'd witnessed anything in that room quietly rounded up and buried with the corpse. To keep the secret nice and clean. I want you to sit with that for a second because I did. This was a man who had murdered his mad brother, his second brother, and now his father patiently over years, one poison cup at a time, all to reach a throne. And in the flush of finally having it, the very first thing he thought to do was murder the harmless servants who'd carried the tea. Not out of necessity, out of tidiness, the way you'd wipe down a table. That told me everything I would ever need to know about the man I was about to spend a lifetime serving. Chen Long had told me to cooperate with Wen Chen, to use him as the one faucet in the kingdom that ran with real resources, and Chen Long was right, and I did it. But I never once forgot the servants. A man who kills the people who poured his tea for tidiness will absolutely kill the eunuch who won his wars, the moment that eunuch looks more like a risk than a tool. I signed his contract with my eyes open. I always knew how it ended. I was just planning to be the one who ended it. I learned most of this from the edges, from gossip, from what Chen Long pieced together from what the palace whispered. But the part that reached out and grabbed me personally came fast, and it came hard. Before he died, the old king had left standing instructions to finally deal with Chen Long, to tie up that particular loose end at last. So the new regime, eager to prove itself, sent Zhuo Ming, the same eunuch who'd stolen my spirit stones, along with 7 fighters to our mansion, to cripple us both, not to kill, not yet, not openly, to break our cultivation and leave us alive and harmless. And old Chen, who could have fought, who could have turned that courtyard into a graveyard, gave me instead the single hardest order of my whole life. Yang Kai, listen to me, do not kill them. Do not cripple their cultivation. Injure them badly, break bones, put them in a bed for months, but nothing more. Not one man dies here today. Because if a king's men die at our gate, then you and I, master and disciple, do not survive the king's answer. Do you understand? We win by losing carefully. So I obeyed. God, it was hard, but I obeyed. Do you have any idea how hard it is to hold back when 8 men have come to your home to cripple you and the person you love most? To hit a man exactly hard enough to break him and not 1 ounce harder. Killing is easy. Killing is a full swing. It's the pulling of the blow that takes real control, and I spent that whole fight with a governor bolted onto every strike. hiding my real level the whole time, letting all 8 of them look at me and see a soft 6th layer nobody, a cook with a title who'd gotten above himself. I went to work. The first man, their body cultivator, their heavy hitter, came in swinging, and I put him through a wall with one kick, measured, so the wall broke and not his spine. 2 trainees came next, and I snapped their legs, clean breaks, months in a bed, but nothing they wouldn't eventually walk off. And their clever one, an earth mage, tried to sink into the ground and hide and strike from below, the oldest trick there is. So I closed my eyes, and I felt for the telltale flutter of his spiritual energy under the flagstones, and I reached down and dug him out of the dirt by the collar like a farmer pulling a turnip that had been trying to bite him. And I left every last one of them alive. Alive and broken and humiliated, and absolutely certain that something was very, very wrong with the picture they'd been sold about the cook in the old man's house. Zhuo Ming got away. He fled the yard with a proper escape technique, one I couldn't match on 2 feet, shrieking the whole time that I'd hidden my cultivation, that I was no 6th layer cook, that they'd all been played for fools. They had been, and it taught me my next great weakness, the one that would nearly kill me more than once. I was a tank in a world where my enemy could simply sprout wings and fly away. All my strength was useless against a man's back as he vanished over a wall. I needed a way to catch what ran. Afterward, once the broken men had been carried off, Chen Long sat me down and taught me the real shape of the world I was actually living in. Because I'd been thinking small, thinking the king was the top, the king was the game. He wasn't. Yin country, Chen Long told me, was not just the king. There were 5 great families under him, great in the way that mattered. Duke Hengshan, the strongest of them, holding a full 40% of the kingdom's land, minting his own coins, writing his own local laws, keeping his own armies. Countries inside the country, all of them quietly. And a hungry, ambitious new king like Wen Chen was going to have to try to break them eventually, because no king can rule a country that has 5 other countries growing inside it. And when he moved, there would be blood, and in blood there is opportunity. So if you want to reach real heights in a single lifetime, Chen Long said, stop wasting your hate on Wen Chen, start serving him instead. Because the throne, rotten as it is the one faucet in this whole kingdom that runs with the resources you actually need. You want to reach spirit gathering, you drink from the king's cup or you don't drink at all. You've shown your potential, he told me. You're only 28, you have more than 10 good years left in this body to grow. And if Wen Chen turns out to be a fit king, a smart one, he won't waste a weapon like you. He'll use you, let him use him back. So when Wen Chen, freshly crowned and freshly paranoid, summoned me and tested my loyalty by ordering me to go and arrest my own master, I passed his test. By refusing, honorably, loudly. I defended Chen Long in front of the whole court. I said the old man had served Yin country more faithfully than any living general, that killing him would freeze the hearts of everyone who ever served the crown, that even the late king, whatever his final orders, would not truly have wanted to end a hero this way. Which was precisely what Wen Chen wanted to hear. Because a man who would betray his own teacher for a promotion is a man you can never trust with anything that matters. If I had handed Chen Long over that day, gift-wrapped, Wen Chen would have used me for it and then thrown me away as garbage the moment I stopped being useful. Loyalty you can buy is loyalty someone else can buy back. Satisfied, he bound me to him, a secret contract, a soul-deep thing, a real technique that meant neither of us could raise a hand against the other without dying on the spot for it. And he named me the town garrison eunuch guard, who elite bodyguard post stationed right beside the royal bedchamber. Prestigious. Cushy and chosen very, very deliberately as a dead end, a gilded cage with no ladder out, so that I could never, ever build up a eunuch faction of my own the way his father once had. He'd planned exactly how to use me and exactly how to cage me before he ever offered me the cage. I didn't care. Truly, because the cage came with 60 spirit stones and 200 pounds of good meat a month. It came with a top-tier cultivation formation from the national teacher himself. And it came with something slipped to me under the table by the chief eunuch, a quiet, friendly man I'd come to call Brother Sue, 2 bone-forging pills. A personal gift from the king, worth a small fortune each one permanently, forever strengthening the body that took it. A man is only ever supposed to be able to absorb 2 in a whole lifetime. And with my monstrous natural strength, my born divine power, those 2 pills fit me like they'd been forged in a mold of my own bones. And then I did the one thing Wen Chen, for all his careful planning, never once saw coming. The first thing I did with my shiny new power and my elite new post was drag Chen Long out of that rotting mansion and conscript him into the garrison, so my dying master would not have to grow old and fade out alone in a house full of weeds. He was furious. Truly furious in the way only someone who loves you can be. Yang Kai, have you lost your mind entirely? I finally kept my life, thanks to you, by being small and quiet and forgotten. It would have been best, the smart thing, the safe thing, if we split up the very moment you got this post. You go up, I disappear. And instead you drag me right into the palace, right next to the king's own bedroom. Are you actively trying to make the man nervous? Do you want us both dead? You haven't taught me half your skills yet, I said. The post is a sinecure, an old soldier's pension. It's perfect. Nobody watches an old retired guard drilling a young one. You keep teaching. I keep learning. And this way I get to keep an eye on you. He grumbled. He called me a fool. He caved, and I moved his books and his weapons and his old killin halberd, the one that had cracked open the earth in his ruined yard, into the garrison. And I bought my master a few more years of not being alone. So I did it anyway. I loaded a cart, his books, his weapons. The old killin halberd. I walked the whole rotting mansion one last time, and I took everything that mattered, and I left the weeds. He complained the entire way. He complained while I carried his crates. He complained while I set up his new room. He was still complaining when I brought him tea that evening in a warm palace next to the king's own guard. I let him. I'd have listened to that old man complain for 1,000 years. I had spent 100 years alone, 10 lifetimes of it, and I had decided somewhere along the way that I was not going to let the one person who ever treated me like a human being fade out in an empty room, whatever it cost. Whatever risk it added, some accounts you pay no matter the price. 5 more years passed in that gilded cage. The body control art climbed to its 25th layer. Foundation establishment, 7th. And somewhere in there, poking through my own inventory of techniques, I stumbled onto a trump card that felt almost illegal. Because it turned out the wind control art I'd taken off Lord Hu's corpse a whole life ago, and Chen Long's body control art, were secretly sister techniques. 2 halves of a whole nobody had put together in centuries. And cultivating both of them, past a certain point, self-taught me a martial skill that no living master could have handed me. The wind explosion technique. It floods the body with 2 different kinds of energy at once and slams them together, and everything multiplies. Strength, speed, toughness. All of it all at once for a short, screaming window of time. And the catch was written right into the technique in plain language. And it was, for a man like me, the most beautiful catch ever written. It burns your lifespan, 10% of your remaining years spent for double strength, 20% for triple, 40% for quadruple. Push past that, spend more, and you simply die on the spot right there mid-swing. A technique that pays for raw power with the one and only currency I own in genuinely infinite supply. I could spend an entire body's remaining lifespan in a single desperate fight, blow it all in 30 seconds, win, and then just go get another body off the shelf. For any normal cultivator, it's a suicide button. For me, it was a discount. For me, it was almost cheating. Which by now you know is my very favorite kind of thing in the whole world. Meanwhile, up on his throne, Wen Chen was busy being the exact kind of king who mistakes stubbornness for vision and being feared for being respected. He wanted to break the 5 great families. Good instinct. Genuinely the right goal. Absolutely catastrophic execution every single time. His first big swing was a cultivation ban. Who edict? No unlicensed cultivators allowed to live and practice freely in Yin. The idea was to choke off the loose, independent cultivators, the wandering talent, and force them all to come serve under the crown for a license. Starve the families of new blood, feed it to the king. He sent me north to enforce it. 6 months, 5 prefectures, hunting down every loose cultivator who wouldn't come kneel for a royal license. And he sent Zhuo Ming along as my deputy, the stone thief, the coward, still nursing his grudge from the day I'd humiliated him at Chen Long's gate. A watchdog to keep an eye on the eunuch. It was the king's idea of balance. It was, in practice, the most one-sided 6 months of my life to that point. Loose cultivators are strong compared to farmers. They are not strong compared to me. I moved through those 5 prefectures in a bronze ghost mask, halberd out, and I cut down everything the edict pointed me at, up to and including a full foundation establishment master who thought his rank made him untouchable and learned otherwise in about 4 seconds. The soldiers under me started whispering names. The great eunuch general, the cold-faced eunuch, and one that I'll admit I liked more than I should have. Young Chen Long. I never corrected them on that one. Zhuo Ming, for his part, spent the whole campaign arriving late. Every fight somehow his column got lost or delayed or bogged down and turned up only after I'd already won it, in time to help count the bodies and claim a share of the credit in his reports back to the capital. I let him. I've never once cared who takes the credit for work I'd have done anyway. The work was the thing. The name was his problem. But somewhere around the 3rd prefecture, riding through a town I'd just cleared, I understood that the whole campaign was a joke and that I was the punchline and so was the king. Because the loose cultivators weren't dying. Not most of them. They were leaving. The strong ones, the useful ones, the ones with anything to offer, they saw the edict coming and simply walked into the open arms of the great families who were standing right there with a smile and a contract. "Come under my roof," said the Duke, "and you're licensed, protected, mine." Every cultivator I drove out of a royal town with a halberd, a noble house caught downstream with a purse. I was a sheepdog herding the whole flock straight into the wolf's pen and calling it a harvest. I wrote it plainly to no one. There was no one to write it to. Chen Long already knew, and the king didn't want to hear it. It backfired exactly, precisely, down to the letter, the way I quietly predicted to Chen Long that it would. Because the great families simply used the ban as legal cover to swallow every one of those loose cultivators themselves. "Come under my roof," said Duke Hengshan, "and you're licensed, you're protected, you're mine." He alone recruited 500 of them. Instead of clipping the family's wings, the king had personally herded an entire generation of free talent straight into their arms and handed them an army. I spent 6 months grimly enforcing that doomed ban up in the northern prefectures, cutting down the few loose cultivators too poor or too proud to take a family's offer. And when I came back, the families were richer and better armed than ever. The crown was weaker, and Wen Chen, being constitutionally unable to blame himself for anything, was busy blaming everyone else in the room. Then his golden boy stepped forward with a fix. Su Yu, my cheerful old friend from the castration line, now the king's favorite advisor, cold and polished and smiling. And he proposed something genuinely, breathtakingly insane. Seize every spirit mine the families owned, all of them. At once, under direct royal control. Whoever holds the spirit stone, he argued, holds the cultivators, because cultivators go where the fuel is. Take the mines, and the families wither on the vine within a year. Anyone in that room with the sense the gods gave a goose knew exactly what that meant. It meant civil war. Within the year. Guaranteed. You do not reach into 5 armed noble houses and take the thing that makes them powerful without every one of them deciding they'd rather die fighting than die slowly. The old loyal advisor, Zhao Xuan, said so out loud, plainly. Warned the king it would force a rebellion. For his honesty, Wen Chen banished him to go guard the royal mausoleum out on the back mountain, an insulting dead-end post for a senior official, punishment for the crime of being right in an uncomfortable direction. The king loved Su Yu's plan. Of course he did. It was bold, and it was fast, and it flattered his impatience, and it let him imagine himself as decisive instead of reckless. I kept my mouth shut through the whole council. Completely shut, because I had learned, watching Zhao Xuan get banished for his wisdom, the single most important survival rule of Wen Chen's court. This king hates honest advice more than he hates his enemies. Who enemy he can behead. Honest advice makes him feel stupid, and he never forgives being made to feel stupid. So I said nothing, and Wen Chen reached into 5 armed houses and took their mines. And the families rebelled, exactly on schedule. And it all came to a head in the throne room. And this is where my famously, catastrophically terrible instincts about likable people finally cost someone their head. The rebel Duke Hengshan, 160 years old and the most senior cultivator left in Yin, marched 300 cultivators right into the palace to advise the king. Everyone knew what advise meant. It was a standoff dressed up as a court audience. 300 rebel cultivators on one side, the king's guard on the other, everyone bristling, everyone's hand near a weapon. And in a room that tense, where every man there was one wrong word away from dying, there was exactly one person completely at ease. Su Yu, the king's golden advisor standing at Wen Chen's right hand, loose in the shoulders, faintly bored, a man watching a play he'd already read the ending of. And I stood in the back in my sixth-layer disguise, playing the weak bodyguard, and I watched him being calm, and his calm was the single loudest thing in that whole bristling hall. Because you do not lounge in a room full of enemies who might kill you in the next breath. Not unless you already know which way the knives are going to point. Not unless you're the one holding them. I didn't know his plan yet. I just knew, watching him yawn through a standoff that had everyone else sweating, that whatever was about to happen in this room, Su Yu had written it. So I kept my eyes on him, and my grip loose, and the killing halberd one thought away from my hand. His son, Duan Chen, the most handsome man in all of Yin country and no slouch with a blade, stepped forward and demanded the king send out a champion to duel one-on-one to set the tone. And the king's advisor, Ma Lei, in his infinite wisdom, chose Zhuo Ming to go die impressively. Zhuo Ming, the stone thief, the coward, a man they could afford to lose. They were saving me as the real trump card, hidden in the back in my sixth-layer disguise. So Zhuo Ming puffed himself up, flicked his sleeves back, and strode out across the marble toward the duke's son to meet his champion's death. And my likable old friend Su Yu, standing at the king's right hand, one step behind Zhuo Ming, drew a golden sword and ran it straight through Zhuo Ming's back. And in the same half-second, before anyone in that entire hall had even begun to process the betrayal, my killing halberd appeared out of empty air in my hand, pulled from the inventory in the space between two heartbeats, and I put it clean through Su Yu's heart from behind. The whole court froze, even the king, even Wen Chen, all that royal composure gone in an instant. What's happening? He stammered, sounding for 1 second exactly like the frightened boy he'd murdered his way past to become king. Su Yu turned his head, slow, agonized, the halberd through his chest, and he looked back at me with something like wonder. They didn't even have time to react, he breathed. Nobody in this hall reacted. How could you have possibly known I would move? I gave no sign. I didn't know what you were going to do, I told him quietly, just for the two of us. I just knew you were the single most suspicious man in this palace. Look at you. 300 enemy cultivators walk into the room, and you're the only person here without a scrap of tension in his shoulders. And when the king issued that cultivation ban, I was up north with Zhuo Ming, the two of us tripping over each other, and the families still swallowed most of the loose cultivators in our territory. But you were down south, alone, unwatched. And somehow you managed to hand the Duke's family every last loose cultivator in the whole southern half of the country. From that exact moment, I never once believed you were loyal to anyone but yourself. He laughed, and there was blood in it now. So that's how it is. All this time, and here I thought I was the cleverest man in the palace. I never once imagined it was you. The cook, the joke, you're the most treacherous man in this whole rotten court. I didn't answer him. I've never much cared what people call me. Monster, servant, traitor. Words are cheap, and I've been called all of them. My son, the old duke cried out across the hall, and there it was, the whole thing unspooling in an instant. Su Yu wasn't Su Yu the loyal palace eunuch at all. He was Duan Kai, the duke's own grandson, a deep-cover spy the Mei family had planted in the palace years and years ago, a genius heir castrated and buried in plain sight as a nobody eunuch, playing a decades-long game for a decades-away payoff. My cheerful friend from the castration line, sent by his own grandfather. He told me the truth at the very beginning, laughing about it, and I'd been too busy liking him to hear it. Impossible, Wen Chen whispered, staring. How could a family bear to send such a genius, such an heir, to be cut, to be a eunuch? Su Yu sneered through the pain, blood on his teeth. How else do you think we resist your family's endless ambitions? You're too ignorant to even understand what you're looking at. With my talent, once I reach the spirit-gathering realm, I can rebuild my own body whole from nothing. What was lost can be regained. A few decades as a eunuch for a throne, a bargain. And it turned out he wasn't lying about the rebuilding either, or at least not about surviving. Because when I twisted the halberd to finish him, his chest turned to quicksand under my blade, his whole body dissolving into loose-flowing earth, and he slithered down into the ground and was gone. Who earth escape technique. And his heart, it turned out, sat on the wrong side of his body to begin with, a rare birth. He'd taken a halberd through what should have been the killing spot and lived. His father, Duan Chen, the most handsome man in Yin, threw himself at me to buy his son's escape, and I'll give the man this. He could genuinely fight. Better than anyone I'd faced in that hall. A metal cultivator with a lost sword control technique, flinging a flying sword at me from 20 meters, guiding it through the air with his will alone, a beautiful, deadly thing that darted and cut from angles no arm could reach. It was a duelist's technique, and that was his whole problem. Because a flying sword at 20 meters is magnificent against another cultivator, standing politely at 20 meters trading blows. It is a great deal less magnificent against a body cultivator, who simply refuses to stay 20 meters away. I shattered the flying sword out of the air with a single halberd strike, and then I closed the distance, because distance was his entire game and I was going to take it away from him. And I made him defend, and defend, and defend. 20 seconds, boot to boot, and he'd burned a full third of his spiritual energy just trying to keep me off his throat. Because for all his beautiful, famous, poetry-worthy swordsmanship, he had never once in his pampered, celebrated life stood in a real melee against something that wanted him dead, and was close enough to smell. And the moment his nerve broke, the moment he turned his back to flee the way his son had, I caught him across the waist with a strike of charged halberd wind. And that was the end of the Duke's beloved son. The old Duke's scream came a full beat too late to help anyone. And then the whole rebellion just cracked open right there because I charged into their 300 cultivators, their top force, the flower of 5 noble houses, and I walked through them like a man walking through tall summer grass. Too weak, I remember saying out loud, genuinely a little disappointed. This is it. This is the top force of Yin country. This is barely any different from cutting down loose cultivators in a field. Chen Long's body control art was extraordinary, worlds beyond what any of these pampered nobles had ever trained against. And I'd learned the Po Lu first and layered his art on top of it, which made me in raw skill honestly stronger than my own master had ever been at his peak. I could feel it cutting through them. The student had passed the teacher. I didn't feel proud of it. I just felt the truth of it in my hands. In the chaos afterward, while the palace was still counting its dead, I volunteered to go chase down the fled Su Yu. Very loyal of me, very dutiful, I did not chase Su Yu. I went to the king's private study. Because I'd learned sometime during that fight that Wen Chen kept his real treasure up on the second floor of it. Not gold techniques. A whole library of them, spells and martial skills and cultivation arts, generations of them, collected by kings and locked away for the royal family's eyes only. Every one of them below profound rank, minor stuff by the standards of the wider world I didn't yet know existed. And every one of them pure, endless, perfect fuel for a man who has infinite lifetimes to burn learning things. For any normal cultivator, you pick one path and you walk it, because you only get one life and one body and you cannot afford to be a dabbler. For me, dabbling is the entire strategy. I have all the lives. I have all the time. Give me 100 mediocre techniques and enough centuries, and I will find the 2 that turn out to be secret sisters, the way the wind art and the body art had been, and I will build a trump card out of a garbage pile. So I went up and I took one of each type, wrapped them all in my own shirt, walked out past the confusion with a bundle under my arm like a man carrying laundry, and buried the whole lot in the backyard of the town garrison guard. Wen Chen found his study looted the next day. He blamed the drunk border generals loudly. He could never prove a thing. And I had just quietly doubled the size of my own arsenal off a single afternoon's loyal pursuit. But there was one technique I couldn't just steal, because I needed him to know I had it, so it would be legal to use in the open. So at the victory banquet, when Wen Chen stood up in front of the whole court, glowing, taking every scrap of credit for a war I'd won for him, and asked his heroic eunuch what reward he desired, I already knew exactly what to ask for. Not gold, not rank, not a title. Your Majesty, I said, bowing. There is a single cultivation art in the royal collection, a body cultivator's evasion technique, the mystic evasion. It's the only one of its kind in all of Yin, and it's useless to your immortal cultivators. But to a body cultivator like me, it would be worth more than a mountain of gold. Because that was my great weakness, the one that had let Zhuo Ming and Su Yu both slip away from me. I was a tank in a world where the enemy could simply turn and fly. I hit like a landslide and I moved like 1-2, and anything with wings or a fast escape spell just went up and over the wall and left me standing there. The mystic evasion would fix it. Afterimages, blurred speed. A body cultivator's answer to the runner's problem. Wen Chen didn't want to give it to me. I watched the calculation cross his face, the old wariness, the reluctance to make his overstrong servant any stronger. But he'd asked publicly in front of the whole court what I wanted, and to refuse a war hero's one modest request at his own victory banquet would have made him look small and ungrateful in front of every noble left alive. So he granted it through his teeth with a gracious smile that fooled no one and cost him nothing he'd admit to. I bowed again deeper, and I went home that night richer by a stolen library and a legal escape technique, having asked out loud for the smallest thing in the room. When Chen won a war he had absolutely no business winning. Entirely, start to finish, on the back of the one eunuch he'd caged in a corner as an afterthought. He thanked me the way small, proud men always thank the people who save them, by taking every ounce of the credit for himself. And then handing me a fresh headache. He made me Grand Marshal, 50,000 men sent south to mop up the last of the Mei remnants in their home territory, with a real general named Wu Guang, his own brother-in-law, as my deputy, which meant in practice that Wu Guang actually ran the army, and I was a figurehead with a shiny title and a vanguard's job, sent to swing the halberd and keep my opinions to myself. We took the rebel city. And when I gave the order that there would be no looting of the civilians, our own Yin people, farmers and shopkeepers who'd had no say in any of it, Wu Guang refused me to my face. Sneered at the eunuch playing soldier, told me the men had earned their plunder, and he wasn't going to be the one to deny it to them. I gave an order, I said. These people aren't traitors, they are subjects. We don't destroy their lives to reward the men who already get paid to be here. We sacrificed a great deal to take this city, Wu Guang said loud, so the other generals could hear him put the eunuch in his place. The men bled for it. Does the marshal really want to interfere with a soldier's right to the spoils? They hadn't sacrificed anything. I'd been watching. They'd hung back during the actual dangerous part of the siege, kept their precious men safe, and only rushed forward now that the walls were down to rob people who couldn't fight back. The bravery was all for the plunder. This is my order, I said. Are you going to disobey it? In front of everyone, yes or no? And I took out the killing halberd. He wasn't afraid, that was his mistake. He was the king's brother-in-law, royalty by marriage, untouchable, and he knew it, and he traded on it. Yang Kai. You're a lowly eunuch who happens to stand next to the king. You think a title makes you a real marshal. What are you going to do? Kill me. You wouldn't dare. You couldn't, I did dare. I took his head off with a single stroke of the halberd. And then I turned, slow, and looked around at the ring of other generals, and I asked, in a very reasonable voice, whether anyone else present had any objections to my order about the civilians. Nobody did. Funny how that works. I saved that city, every soul in it, and for the crime of saving it, of embarrassing the king's brother-in-law into a corpse, when Chen stripped me of my command and dragged me back to the capital in disgrace, furious that I'd made a mess and killed his relative and shown up his handpicked general. I let him. Honestly, I was glad of it. I had never once wanted to be a marshal, and now I'd be left alone to cultivate in peace, because the king was too wary of my strength to actually punish me properly, and far too proud to ever admit that was the reason. So I went home to the garrison, and I cultivated, and 10 more years slipped past the way they do when you have a warm room and a quiet purpose. My borrowed body reached 48. I pushed the body control art all the way to its 31st layer, until ordinary blades genuinely couldn't leave a mark on my skin, and a sword strike felt like a friend clapping me on the shoulder. And somewhere in those quiet years, I ran into the wall. Because the body control art had 33 layers, and the 31st was near the ceiling, and the ceiling was foundation establishment, and no body cultivator in Yin had ever crossed out of it into the realm beyond. Chen Long, before he faded, had explained the shape of it to me. Immortal cultivators break through by refining their Kai until the body itself transforms and sheds its impurities. A body cultivator has no such door. We climb, and then the stairs simply end, in a wall with nothing painted on it. In a country as small and starved as Yin, body cultivation was an incomplete path with no top to it. Which meant, I understood, sitting in my warm room at 48 in a body that couldn't be cut, that if I wanted a real ceiling, a real answer, I was eventually going to have to leave. Not this room. Not this palace, this whole country. Maybe this whole small, strange, walled-in world, though I didn't yet know how walled-in it really was. I filed it away with everything else. A plan for a later life. First, I'd master everything this cage had to offer. Then I'd start looking for the door out of it. And when I finally decided it was time to stop hiding in my corner and went to the king to offer my service again, when Chen tried to probe my cultivation level. Casually. The way you'd pry open a horse's mouth to check its teeth before you buy it. And he broke into a cold sweat right there on his own throne. Because with Conceal Kai, I let him feel exactly what I wanted him to feel. Something vast, something unfathomable and cold and deep, something a very, very long way past anything he could ever hope to touch, an ocean where he'd expected a puddle. He didn't know it was a mask. He couldn't know. And suddenly the king who had sidelined me for 20 years, who'd stripped my command and dragged me home in disgrace, was extremely, sweatily polite to me. He wanted the Eastern barbarians dealt with. The rising Lai country in the East, the one born out of the massacre of Chen Long's legion all those years ago. And now when Chen had, standing in front of him, a weapon that terrified him. So naturally off to war I went. It's always easier to point a thing you're afraid of at someone else. But first he had to hand me an army, and the army did not want to be handed over. When Chen gave me command of the palace eunuch army, 30,000 strong, and it had been built, drilled, and raised from nothing by a eunuch general named Qin Bao, a body cultivator himself, a man who'd poured his whole life into those soldiers and earned real merit doing it. And Qin Bao was not thrilled to have some overtitled bodyguard walk in and take his life's work by royal decree. So at the review, in front of all 30,000 of them, he did the honorable thing. He challenged me to a duel for the command. Win, and the army was mine, fairly. Lose, and I could explain to the king why his weapon had been embarrassed in front of the troops. It lasted about 4 seconds. He came at me with a good spirit-imbued sword, a real technique behind it, decades of discipline in the swing. I let it come, caught the flat of it against my bare palm, and shattered the blade with a squeeze. Then I kicked him, once open-handed's cousin, and sent him tumbling 10 meters across the parade ground to land at the feet of his own front rank. No halberd, no spell, no Conceal Kai tricks. Just a body 3 decades hardened against a man who'd thought he was strong. 30,000 eunuch soldiers went very quiet, and then they knelt, when Chen was delighted. Awed even watching from his platform, and freshly nervous underneath the awe, the way he always was when I showed him a corner of what I could do. He named me Grand Commander of the Inner Guard on the spot, gave me the whole army. And then in the same breath, he discarded Qin Bao like a cracked cup. No reward for a lifetime of building the very army the king was so proud of. No longevity pill, nothing, not even a kind word. Just thank you, you're dismissed, the eunuch has it now. I watched the old general walk off that parade ground with nothing, and I watched Ma Lei, the king's own advisor, frown at it, uneasy, because even a schemer understands that a king who throws away his loyal servants the instant they stop being useful is teaching every other servant a very dangerous lesson about loyalty. I filed it away. Qin Bao, a proud man discarded. The kind who remembers, it always comes back around. I won that war almost single-handedly. Led his eunuch army east with the same brutal discipline I'd learned worked. One deserter, and his whole squad answered for it, so nobody deserted. Expanded the borders of Yin by thousands of miles, prefecture after prefecture, the eunuch army rolling east under a cold-faced commander who fought at the front of every siege. And there was one part of it that was not for Wen Chen, and not for Yin, and not for glory or points. Because the Kai king, Wei Quan, was the brother of the man who had ambushed Chen Long's legion in a valley a lifetime ago. His whole country, his crown, his dynasty, all of it had been founded on the massacre of hundreds of my master's men, leveled up on their corpses. Chen Long had come home from that valley in disgrace and faded out in a rotting mansion because of these people. And now I was marching a Yin army into the heart of their kingdom. I captured Wei Quan alive, personally, with my own 2 hands, after dozens of rounds, a strong dual cultivator king taken down and bound like a common thief. And I dragged him back to the capital in chains, kicking, a king on a leash. It didn't bring Chen Long back. Nothing was ever going to bring Chen Long back. But I laid the whole Eastern threat, the thing that had killed his legion and broken his name, at the foot of a throne he'd bled for, and I thought quietly, this one's for you, old man, even if you're not here to see it. And when Chen, sitting safe in the rear the whole campaign, drinking tea, took every last ounce of the credit for the victory, while I got a reputation as a god of war and precisely nothing else. That's the whole lesson about chasing glory under a man like Wen Chen. It does not matter how well you do the work. It does not matter if you do all of it alone, bleeding. He owns the story. He always owns the story, and the story is the only thing anyone remembers. But I hadn't done it for him. I'd done it for a dead man's dream I wasn't quite ready to admit was dying. Because while I was off in the East winning a war and capturing a king back home in the garrison, Chen Long was running out of time. He was 100 years old now. His cultivation had left him entirely, drained away to the last drop, exactly as the throne had waited so patiently for. The unfathomable, terrifying man who'd made every hair on my body stand up at that haunted gate, the mountain I couldn't break free of, was now a thin old thing with almost no teeth left, his body gone to a bamboo pole, his face spotted and sunken, his hands trembling when he tried to lift a cup of tea. And I, who had watched 10,000 people die in a mine and felt only a cold understanding, who had strangled men and beheaded generals without a flicker, stood in his little room and felt something crack open in my chest that I thought I had sealed shut and buried 100 years ago. "Yang Kai," he said, and he smiled at me. A real smile, warm, unclouded, like a man finally setting down a heavy load he'd been carrying a very long way. "You know, my greatest achievement in this whole life wasn't any battle I ever won. It wasn't the glory or the rank or the enemies I killed. It was getting a disciple like you at the very end, when I'd stopped hoping for anything at all." "Master, it's my fault," I said, and my voice came out wrong. "I'm useless, all this power, and I can't extend your life a single day, not one." He shook his head, slow. "I've lived 100 years in this world, longer than a man like me had any right to, and I'll die in my own bed warm with my disciple beside me instead of face down in a valley with my legion. For a man like me, that's not a tragedy, boy. That's already more than I ever dared to expect. Don't you dare mourn it like a loss." And then this dying old man pushed himself up off the bed, refusing my hand, and he asked me a question I wasn't ready for. "You're different now. You're strong. Stronger than I ever was. I've known that for years. Don't insult us both by pretending. So why are you still running? Still hiding in a corner, playing weak, playing the cook? You're almost 60. Half this life is already gone. Why are you still holed up in this place, showing the world nothing?" He wanted me to stop hiding. Just once. To let the world see one single time what the body control art he'd given me could really do. Not for the king, not for glory, for him. So that before he went, he could know his art had walked out into the daylight in the hands of someone worthy, instead of dying in the dark with him. "Do it for me, Yang Kai," he said. "That's all I'll ask you for, just do it for me." "Master, your disciple will fight for it," I said, and my voice broke clean in half on the words. "I swear it, now save your strength, please lie down." "I still have a little left," he said. "And I find I don't want to spend it lying in a sick like a corpse waiting on the undertaker for another few months. Help me up, properly, both hands." So I helped him up, this old man who weighed almost nothing now, who I could have lifted with one finger. "Others think," he said, catching his breath, "that you mastered the Northern Land halberd technique to perfection. But I know you didn't. I know you fight with some other method underneath it, something all your own. That's your secret I never once pried." A man's earned his secrets. He looked at me with a glint I hadn't seen in years. "You're getting old too in this body, and I don't know if you'll break through the last of the halberd technique in this lifetime or not. So, before I go, let me show it to you one last time. The whole thing, and maybe it helps you, maybe it doesn't. But I'd like to dance it once more while I still can." "No, master, you can't. You'll—" "Bring me the halberd," he said, and there was the old iron in it under the frailty just for a moment. "Bring me my killin. I want to dance with her one last time, while I still have the strength to lift her." So I put the killin halberd into his shaking hands. And out in the autumn training yard, under a slow falling rain of golden leaves, the greatest eunuch general that Yin country ever produced danced one last time. His movements were slow, weak, painfully weak. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you would never in 100 years have guessed you were watching the famous Northern Land halberd technique at all. You'd have seen only a frail old man waving a blade far too heavy for him, shuffling through the leaves. But I knew. And through the slowness, through the tremor in his hands, I could see all of it. Every principle, every hard truth he'd gathered across a whole lifetime of war and blood and loss, distilled down and laid out bare and gentle and complete, there in the falling leaves. All the versatility of it. All the exquisite, impossible skill, no longer hidden behind speed and force, just there, naked, offered up. It went on for maybe 3 minutes. It was 3 minutes. It was a whole life. He swung, slower each time, and on the very last strike, a single thin thread of halberd energy left the blade, the last of his cultivation, everything he had left. And it drifted out and cut one slow-falling golden leaf clean in two in the air, before the leaf had even touched the ground. Then he fell. And I caught him, and I understood, kneeling there in the leaves with him in my arms, that I was never going to learn from him again. That the one chair anyone had ever offered me at a table was empty now. And in that same instant, watching a dying man split a falling leaf with the last breath of his strength, the northern land halberd technique that I had been stuck on, blocked on for years, opened all the way inside me. Complete, great perfection, the whole thing understood at last. His final gift, taught with the very last of his life in a yard full of falling leaves. I felt no joy, none. The most important person I had ever known in 100 years was gone from my arms, and I had gotten stronger in the exact instant he left, and the two facts sat side by side in my chest and refused to touch each other, refused to make any sense together at all. Hardly anyone came to the funeral. I'd been sidelined for years by then, forgotten, and the throne had spent 2 decades quietly erasing his name from every record. So the greatest general of an entire age went into the ground in an obscure, weedy corner of the world, with only his disciple standing over the grave. I buried him near a small river the Yin people call the river of returning home, because they believe the souls of the dead go back along it to be reborn. I buried him there. Then I knelt at the bank and washed my face in that cold river, and I looked down at my reflection in the water and did not recognize the old man looking back up at me. For the first time in 12 lives, I had lived long enough to actually grow old. And it was Chen Long's protection, and Chen Long's teaching, and Chen Long's chair at his table that had bought me every one of those years. And now Chen Long was gone. I did not cry. But for a long time afterward, I felt exactly as though I had. When I came back from that Eastern War, chained king and all, I went straight to Chen Long's grave to tell him about it, to report the whole campaign. Every march, every fight, the moment I put my hands on the Kai King, the way a student reports to a teacher who wasn't there, the grave was open. Dug up, the burial goods sitting there untouched, undisturbed, ignored. The body was gone. Somebody had stolen my master's corpse and left the grave gold sitting in plain sight, which meant they hadn't come for treasure. They'd come for him. And that is the single thread that, once I pulled it, unraveled absolutely everything. Because the only power on earth that would bother stealing a disgraced old eunuch's bones and leave the gold behind was the throne. So I went to the king's terrified personal attendant, a nervous man now that Brother Su was long gone, and I squeezed him for everything he knew. And I learned that Wen Chen hadn't taken the body, but that Wen Chen himself had gone strange. Deeply strange. Ever since the Eastern campaign, the attendant whispered, the king had been slipping away. Alone. Every single day, to the back mountain, to the royal mausoleum. He'd vanished there for a full day and a night once and come back wrong. He ignored his harem entirely now, and the palace servants around him, more and more of them, were turning odd, hollow, joyless. Moving through their duties like puppets with the strings cut halfway, smiling with the mouth and nothing behind the eyes. So I followed him. Up the back mountain, to the royal mausoleum, the resting place of the old kings, the place they said suppressed the country's very luck. The tomb guard on the path was an old official named Zhao Xuan, the genuinely loyal man when Chen had banished out here years ago for the crime of warning him that the mind seizure would start a war. He blocked my path and told me politely that the king had not come this way, that there was nothing up here for me, that I should go back down. And every instinct I owned started screaming at once, because Zhao Xuan looked exactly the same as he had 20 years ago, not a day older, standing there in the mountain wind, telling me a smooth, calm lie. My hand moved before I'd finished deciding. I punched a hole clean through his heart. And he kept talking, kept standing, didn't so much as stumble. He looked down at the hole in his own chest, mildly, and then he threw a fireball at me, which I fanned aside with a wind-wrapped sweep of the Killin halberd like brushing away smoke. Because Zhao Xuan had been dead for over 20 years, murdered his second night on the job, out here alone in the dark, and turned into a puppet. His corpse worn like an old coat by something else, his own soul trapped screaming inside it, for 2 decades made to guard the road and lie to visitors. When I finally destroyed the body past its ability to hold together, his real self surfaced, just for one single breath, one moment of the man he'd been. And he thanked me. With his last scrap of freedom, he thanked me for it. And he told me 2 things fast before he went. That the man who'd killed him was Guo Ping, the old vanished advisor. But that Guo Ping was not the true mastermind. And he begged me, this loyal man who'd guarded a tomb in torment for 20 years, to find the one who was. And then I let him rest, finally, and I walked down into the tomb. And I found a whole underground palace glowing beneath the mountain. Vast, lit with a cold, sourceless light that came from nowhere and threw no honest shadows. And it was staffed. That was the wrong part, the part that put ice down my spine faster than the corpse king himself would. There were servants down there. Dozens of them, sweeping floors that never got dirty, carrying trays down halls to nowhere, bowing to me as I passed, murmuring the little courtesies a palace servant murmurs, and every one of them with eyes like windows into an empty room. They looked alive. They moved like the living, and there was nothing behind any of it, just hollow things going through the memorized motions of tending a court that had no business existing beneath a graveyard. I passed a maid who smiled at me and wished me a good evening, and I have fought corpse kings and burned in fireballs and strangled men with my hands, and that smile was the single most frightening thing I saw in that entire life. And at the center of all of it, on a throne in full royal robes, sat Wen Chen, my king, sitting on a second throne under his own ancestor's tomb, surrounded by his soulless court. And something in me went very cold and very still looking at it, because I understood I had walked into the answer to every strange thing, and the answer was worse than the questions. The thing wearing Wen Chen's face offered to spare me, if I forgot everything I'd seen, turned around, walked out, and never came back. I refused. And behind the throne, a white-bearded old man stepped out of the shadows, radiating no life at all, no warmth, nothing. Guo Ping, the old advisor who'd poisoned the king and fled the palace decades ago, now boasting in a dry, dead whisper of his near-eternal life. And then the real mastermind walked out from behind a screen, wearing a face I had only ever seen before in old palace portraits. The old king, Lei Su, not dead. Never dead. He'd seen his own son's ambitions coming years and years in advance, read the murder in Wen Chen's eyes before Wen Chen had even worked up the nerve. So he'd used Guo Ping's collected techniques, evil corpse cultivation techniques, the darkest kind, to fake his own death at his son's hand, and vanish down into this mausoleum to secretly become a corpse cultivator. Decades of it, down here in the dark, feeding on death, breaking through to the spirit-gathering realm that no honest cultivator in Yin had reached in centuries. He'd made loyal Zhao Xuan into a puppet. He'd made Guo Ping into a willing one, a man who'd traded his living soul for a longer, colder existence. And then, after the Eastern Campaign, he had killed and puppeted his own son, Wen Chen, the son who'd killed him, and started spreading the rot outward through the palace, one hollow servant at a time. And to prove, I think, just how far past caring, past humanity, past anything he'd traveled down here, he reached down and threw Chen Long's abused, stripped skeleton at my feet, across the cold stone floor, and called my master trash. Too weak, he said, to even bother reanimating. He'd stolen the bones on a whim and found them useless. Something in me went very, very quiet then, quieter than the tomb. Puppet Wen Chen attacked first. Still dreaming, even dead, even hollowed out, that he could somehow use me as a weapon against his own father, the way he'd used me his whole life. I took his sword arm off at the shoulder, and the sword spun away and I caught it into the inventory, and the system told me exactly what it was. The Yin King's sword, a Saint-grade blade, the fate sword of the whole country, and it grew stronger, the description said, the more Yin country itself prospered. The literal sword of the kings. Then I shattered the puppet that had been Wen Chen to pieces on the stone, and I felt our old soul contract go dead and slack inside me in the same moment, the binding force simply gone, which meant Wen Chen, the real Wen Chen, was truly and finally dead, had been for a while. His own father burned the broken pieces of him to ash on the floor without a single flicker of feeling crossing that ancient face. And then it was just me, and a spirit-gathering corpse king who'd been eating death in the dark for 30 years. And for the first time in this whole life, I was outclassed. His technique was ugly, and it was clever, and it was built for exactly this. 3 bodies. Him and 2 copies moving together, attacking together, and only the one real body among them ever took real damage. The other two were just smoke wearing his shape. I'd cut one in half and it would dissolve into black mist and reform a heartbeat later somewhere else, whole, grinning. I couldn't tell which was which. Every solid hit I landed hit nothing that mattered. Guo Ping came at my mind first, casting an illusion, an endless field of ice and drifting swords, the classic trap laid for a body cultivator, whose great weakness is a soul unguarded by spiritual technique. It should have frozen me solid in my own head. But a soul that has lived across 11 separate lives, that has died 11 times and come back, that has counted 100 years of days, is not a soul you trap with a pretty illusion of ice. It rebounded off me and slammed back into him, and Guo Ping staggered away clutching his head and screaming, his own trap turned inside out on him, and I crossed the floor and ended him mid-scream, turned him to paste, one puppet down. But Lei Su raked his hand across my belly with black corpse flame, and it went in, and it kept burning, deep, wrong, eating me from the inside, and I had to take the Yin King sword and cut the burning flesh out of my own body to stop it spreading. And still every real blow I threw at him just passed through smoke, and the two false bodies wore me down, and I could feel this life ending in a tomb under a mountain, unremembered, one more corpse for the Corpse King's collection. So I bet everything. I burned 24 years of my own lifespan on the wind explosion technique. 24 years, gone in an instant, spent like loose change, and I screamed as my own flesh tore and reknit itself from the inside, as the two energies slammed together and multiplied everything I was. And I came out the other side of that scream fast enough to matter. Fast enough, finally, to win. Because I'd worked it out, watching, bleeding, dying. The body swap had a cooldown, a rhythm, a half-second after the real body surfaced to strike before it could dissolve and trade places again when it was solid and real and mortal. So I stopped chasing smoke. I started reading his rhythm instead. Feinting with one weapon, the Killing halberd, drawing the real body out to counter and landing the real blow with the other, the Yin King sword blinking out of my inventory and into my offhand at the exact half-second his true body committed. Feint. Read. Punish. Feint. Read. Punish. He panicked. This ancient thing that had eaten death in the dark for 30 years, that had murdered its own family for immortality, panicked. He tore his own chest open in desperation and grew a second head out of it, swelled up into a 3-meter monster of gray flesh and black flame. And then he offered me everything. Cultivation, treasure, the whole kingdom, the real one up in the sunlight, anything, everything if I would only stop. And I took the Yin King sword, the fate blade of Yin country, the sword its kings had carried for centuries, and I cut the head off the Yin King with it. The sword of the kings used to kill a king. The first time in the entire history of the country that it had ever happened. I did not stop cutting until there was nothing left down there that could ever put itself back together. The mausoleum went silent. The hollow servants dropped where they stood, strings cut for good. And I stood in the middle of it, aged and burned and swaying, and understood that I had won. And then, because the old monster had been thoughtful enough to build himself a secret base down here over 30 patient years, I looted it. I found the hidden chamber behind a cracked wall, a superb cultivation formation, better than anything up in the palace, and an entire room stacked floor to ceiling with spirit stones, half a national treasury's worth, embezzled and hoarded coin by coin across decades. I took his corpse technique manual too, the 3-body art, though it was useless to me, since a technique that needs real, permanent death to cultivate fights against reincarnation itself. I took it anyway. You never leave a technique on the floor. And then I did the one thing that actually mattered down there. I gathered up Chen Long's abused, scattered bones, gently all of them, and I moved them into the luxurious royal coffin that Lei Su had prepared over all those years for himself. Because if anyone on this earth deserved to lie in a king's tomb, in a king's coffin, it was the man who had actually loved this rotten country enough to bleed for it, and not the beast who'd sat under it draining it dry. "Rest here, old man," I told him, settling the last of him into the silk. "You earned it more than he ever did. Better than he ever could have. Sleep." The wind explosion had a price I hadn't fully understood until it was over, and I looked down at my own hands in the cold light of the tomb. It hadn't just shortened my lifespan, Cap. It had aged me. 24 years spent gone, taken out of the body all at once. My 56-year-old frame now moved like an 80-year-old's, joints gone stiff and slow. My hard-won strength collapsed back down to a fraction of its peak. Who, old man, suddenly, standing alone in a stone room full of a dead king's treasure. So I did the only sensible thing left to do. I sealed myself into Lei Su's hidden chamber with its perfect formation and its mountain of spirit stones, and nobody left alive in the world who knew the door was there. And I cultivated, for 25 years. With a room full of spirit stones and no one on earth to bother me, I devoured every technique I'd ever collected across 11 lives. I mastered all 5 elements, fire and water and metal and wood and earth, layering them one after another. I filled this old borrowed body with more spiritual energy than most spirit-gathering masters hold in a lifetime, poured it in until it couldn't hold more. Outside, the world moved on without me, exactly the way it always does the second you stop feeding it your attention. Wen Chen's old advisor Ma Lei covered up the king's disappearance, installed a controllable child on the throne, and made himself the true power in Yin. And none of it, not one bit of it, mattered to me anymore. And then, near the very end of it, the world remembered I was down there. Or rather, it stumbled onto me by accident. I heard the picks first, weeks of them getting closer, a great scraping and pounding coming through the stone. The court had sent thousands of laborers up the back mountain to expand the mausoleum, to carve out a fresh tomb for some new dead king, and they dug, and one day a pick came straight through my wall, and daylight fell into a chamber that hadn't seen it in 25 years. I was old by then. The wind explosion had already aged this body once, and a quarter-century on top of that had finished the job. My physical strength, my beautiful hard body cultivator strength, was mostly gone, run down to an old man's. But my immortal cultivation, the 5 elements, the mountain of spiritual energy I'd poured in, that was full to the brim. I was weak in exactly the way the world expected an old man to be, and strong in a way it couldn't see, which by now you know is my favorite condition. I climbed out into the dust and the torchlight, and I found a scene I knew in my bones. Slaves. Hundreds of them. Digging a tomb they already understood they'd be sealed inside when it was finished. Because that's how it works. You don't let the men who know where the treasure is buried walk back down the mountain. 2 of them were arguing about it near the breach. One insisting there was still hope, the other, older, telling him quietly to save his breath. That men like them didn't get hope, only the choice of how to spend the last of their strength. And an overseer stood over the pair of them with a whip and 30-odd deaths already on it, telling them to dig faster and die quieter. 180 years, and here was the mine again. The same scene, the same whip, the same arithmetic. The world only ever tells you one story over and over until you're strong enough to change the ending. So I changed it. I killed the overseer first. Then I told the laborers, all of them, that any man who wanted to walk out of this mountain alive could follow me, and any man who'd rather take his chances with the king's mercy was welcome to stay. Most of them followed. The guard on the back gate was light. Nobody expects an escape from a tomb. I burned through the 2 body cultivators posted there with a compressed fireball and a wall of thorned vine. Scattered the rest with a rain of iron needles, and I walked a few hundred slaves out through a gate that was never meant to open outward. And then, on the far side of it, in the open air, I did the one thing I had never once been able to do in 180 years. I took off their brands. Because that was the whole trick of the collar, the reason escape had always been a bedtime story. Every slave in this world is marked, branded deep with a thing that follows you to the grave and lets any hunter with a hound run you down in the wilderness. As Wai Chen in the mine, I'd said it flat. Escape is pointless, we're branded. But a slave brand is a formation. A small, ugly one, and to unwork it you need 4 kinds of spiritual energy braided together at once, which no cultivator in Yin could do, and which I, after 25 years mastering the 5 elements in a dead king's chamber, could do in my sleep. So I did it, one by one, burned the marks off a few hundred people and sent them walking, unbranded, unmarked, untraceable into a world that had been built specifically to make sure they never could. It cost me nothing. It was the easiest thing I did all century. And it was, I think, the only thing in that entire life I did purely because I wanted to, and not because it served some plan. The court, of course, could not have that. Ma Lei, now the true power in Yin, learned that an old cultivator had come out of the royal tomb wielding 2 spells at once, a body cultivator turned immortal cultivator in his old age, which is a thing that simply does not happen, and he panicked and put a bounty on my head. 1,000 spirit stones. So I spent the last of that life hunted, taking assassination work under a false name to fund my own cultivation, drifting, an old ghost with a bounty, grinding the body control art one last stubborn notch higher out of pure habit. My body finally gave out at the very end of it, an old man on his own terms for once, having burned a few hundred brands off a few hundred people on his way to the grave. And the modifier settled the account. And this time the numbers didn't just make me sit up. This time they rewrote the rules of the whole game. Survival, 84 years. Infamy, remembered in the histories, plus 1,500. Peaceful death within my own lifespan on my own terms, points doubled. Sacrifice of a profound grade technique, plus 300. Final total, 1,968 experience points for a grand running total of over 2,000. And crossing 2,000 unlocked it. The Universal Modification Module. The part of my cheat I'd been promised at the very beginning on day one in that starter pack and never once been allowed to touch. A place where I could create anything, any technique, any item, limited only by my imagination and the points to pay for it. For the first time since I'd chosen reincarnation in a fit of gamer arrogance 180 years earlier, the modifier stopped trolling me and started paying out. So I raised my aptitude and my comprehension to genuine, real talent. And then, for the very first time, I built something out of nothing. A technique made to order, cut to fit my exact broken shape. The spiritualization art. A technique that took my single greatest weakness, that garbage miscellaneous root that couldn't blend its scattered energies, and turned it into a strength by fusing all my mismatched powers into one clean, unified whole. And I lay back down, in a dead king's chamber I had made my own in the dark, and I whispered the words that had stopped feeling like a curse a while ago and had started, somewhere in there, to feel like a door I was choosing to walk through. Initiate reincarnation. In my next life, I decided, as the dark came up warm around me, I was not going to be a slave. I was done being small. Life number 12 began the way all of them began, with a whip already falling toward my back. I was a 17-year-old field slave named Feng Jianwu, and I was collapsing under the noon summer sun in the wheat fields of a place called Bonn Town. 8 years I'd already worked those fields in this body's memory. The land belonged to the charitable Fan family, whose charity, like all charity in this world, stopped precisely and exactly at the edge of their own slaves. Who overseer had raised his whip to teach the fainting boy a lesson about fainting. But this time, as the old memories flooded in cold behind my eyes and the whip came whistling down, I reached up almost lazily and caught it. And with a flick of will, I sliced it into confetti in the air, a rain of little leather scraps drifting down over the wheat. And I felt something I had not felt in 180 years of reincarnations. Something so unfamiliar I stopped, right there in the dirt, just to sit with it a moment and make sure it was real. I was whole. This body was not a eunuch. Small mercies, universe, I will take it. I will genuinely, sincerely take it, and I won't even complain about the other 180 years, not today. What demonic technique is that? The overseer stammered, backing away from the boy who'd caught his whip. This is magic, I told him, standing up straight in a young man's healthy, whole body with a cultivator's power already flowing through every inch of it, inherited, ready, waiting. And I truly do not care how many slaves you've whipped to death out here in these fields. I only care about one of them, the one you're about to go join. I pointed one finger, he fell. And I stretched, feeling the strength move clean and easy through a body that didn't ache and wasn't missing anything. And I turned and looked across the wheat toward the Fan family's front gate. And I decided that the promise I'd written in a dead man's blood 2 lives ago was very, very overdue for a payment. Slave owners will pay a bloody price. I walked to the gate like a man out for an evening stroll. 2 guards saw a ragged serf coming and told me to get lost before they made me. I waved a hand, and they both grabbed their throats and stumbled and dropped in the dust in front of me. And I stepped over them and walked in. I will not pretend to you that I did anything gentle inside that house. I want to be honest with you about why, because it's the one part I won't dress up. In this body's memories, there was a friend. Another slave child, the only kind thing in Feng Jianwu's whole short, brutal life. And a Fan child, 9 years old, well-fed and well-mannered and beautifully dressed, had beaten that friend to death in the front yard. For the crime of wandering into it. Hungry and lost and 9 himself. The Fan boy had done it the way a bored child pulls the wings off a fly, without heat, without hate, simply because he'd been raised to understand, all the way down to the bone, that a slave's life was a toy he was allowed to break, and that no one would ever tell him no. And no one had. That was the thing, not the boy's father who'd praised him, not the household who'd looked away, not the God they all prayed to. The whole machine of that beautiful, charitable, pious house existed to raise children exactly that certain that some lives don't count. If you enjoy the fruits of a family's cruelty, if you grow fat and soft and safe on it, then you inherit the family's debts when the bill finally comes due. That's not vengeance, it's just accounting. And the bill came due that afternoon, for all of them. The head of the Fan family, a seventh-layer nobody in silk, knelt on his own floor and offered me anything, everything, the whole fortune, if I would only spare his household. I ended him mid-sentence, and with his last breath he cursed me, promised me that heaven would punish this, that the gods themselves would strike me down for it. This pious, generous man who had led his slaves in worship of a protection god called the Belling God, every festival, hands folded, eyes raised. Even as those same worshipping slaves lived worse than his livestock and died younger. So I walked to the family shrine, to the god's painted portrait, serene and golden on the wall, and I burned it off the wall with a flick of energy. And then I said it out loud, loud enough for any god who happened to be listening up there to hear every word. Heaven, gods, whoever's home, if you are even half as kind as these slave owners keep insisting you are, then where were you? Every single day your faithful followers lived worse than animals and prayed to you anyway. Where were you? What exactly were you protecting? And the sky, I swear to you on 11 lives, went dark. Clouds gathered overhead out of a clear noon, boiling up fast. Wind began to howl through the courtyard like something enormous was about to come down out of the heavens and answer me. Somewhere very far away, on an island floating in the clouds that I had no way of seeing, two beautiful men in white robes sat at a stone table playing a long, leisurely game of chess. Beings of a higher order entirely, the kind the mortals down below would have called gods and worshipped if they'd known enough to name them. And one of them paused, a piece between two fingers, and frowned mildly, the way you'd frown at a mosquito heard but not seen. And he murmured to the other that some ant in some backwater country at the bottom of the world had just dragged his good name through the mud. And what a genuine pity it was, he said, returning to the board, that his divine power couldn't reach quite that far down to punish the little thing for it. The distance was simply too great, beneath his notice, really. He made his move and forgot me, and the game went on. He was right about the distance. He just had the direction wrong. He thought I was too far beneath him to bother reaching. I already knew, standing down there in the wind and the dark, that the whole point of my existence was to climb up out of that jar and go find men exactly like him. It was going to take me a while, but I've always had a while. Down in the dark and the howling wind, I looked up at the boiling sky, and I spat on the ground. If you can gather storm clouds just to scare me, I called up, then why couldn't you ever gather them to shade your worshippers from the heat that killed them in these fields? If you could actually do anything to me at all, you'd have done it already instead of putting on a light show, so do it. I'm right here. I'm not hard to find. The clouds broke apart. The wind died, nothing came down. Because I am not afraid of dying. I have done it 11 times, and every single time I woke back up. And a man who cannot be threatened with death cannot be ruled. Not by slave owners, not by kings, not by gods playing chess in the clouds. I looted 100 spirit stones out of the Fan family treasury. And then I did the part that actually mattered, the part that wasn't about the gods or the debt at all. I threw open the family's 100 years of hoarded wealth to the tens of thousands of slaves on their lands. So they'd have the coin to buy themselves free, to buy tools, to buy a start. And I told them the truth on my way out the gate, because a lie would have been kinder, and I was done being kind about this. No savior is coming, not me, not a god, not anyone. You just saw what happened when I called one down. Nothing came. Nothing ever comes. You'll have to save yourselves, all of you together, or not at all. I can only kill the wolf standing in front of me right now. And I promise you, standing here in this dead man's house, there will always be another wolf. It's not a hopeful speech, I know that, but it's the only true one I had. I'd spent 100 years waiting for a savior, in 10 different bodies, and the only one who ever showed up was me, and I'd had to become a monster to do it. The least I could do on my way out was tell them not to wait the way I'd waited. Then I went and found the small house south of a river where I had died, alone as Yang Kai only one life ago. His corpse was still there, barely a day cold because reincarnation had spat me out fast this time, dropped me into a new body almost the moment the old one stopped. So I carved him a proper headstone with my own hands, Tomb of Yang Kai. "Stay here a while, old me," I told the body, patting the fresh stone. "Feng Jianwu will come and keep you company when it's his turn. We all end up back here eventually." Because here is what I had finally, at long last, decided after 180 years of it. In every single life before this one, my grand ambition, my whole dream had been the same. Find a quiet corner, cultivate in it safely. Die of old age, try again. That is not a life goal. I understood that now, standing whole in a burning wheat field. That is hiding. That is a frightened man's plan dressed up as patience and called wisdom. 180 years, and the biggest thing I'd ever dared to want was to be left alone. Well, I was done wanting small things. And this life, with a whole unbroken body, a cheat-edited aptitude, a technique I'd built from nothing that fixed my broken root, and enough hidden strength that Yin Country's so-called masters were beneath my notice, I was finally going to stop hiding. I was going to take the whole board. I just needed a legitimate face to hang on the front of it. Because I'd learned that lesson too hard in the mine and after. A slave who seizes power on his own, alone with nothing but a sword and a grudge, inspires exactly one thing in the world: a hunt. Every free man alive unites to put him down like a rabid dog, because if one slave can do it, any slave can, and that thought keeps kings awake. But a slave who restores a rightful heir to a stolen throne, that's not a rebel. That's a hero. That's a loyal man, a cause, a banner. That's something men will kneel for instead of hunt. And it just so happened that Yin Country had a rightful heir going begging. His name was Wen Kai, the eldest legitimate son of that dead patricide Wen Chen, the crown prince who by every law and custom should have inherited the throne, passed over and exiled by the usurping minister Ma Lei, who'd installed a controllable child instead. Now Wen Kai was hiding out in a distant southern city, running a shabby little resistance group, the Old Yin Society, out of the back room of a tavern. A real king with no army. And me, who army of one with no crown and no wish for one. You see how neatly those two shapes fit together. I found their tavern, and I found their loyal muscle before I found the prince. A gray old eunuch general, standing guard at the back, hand on his sword the second I walked in wrong. And I knew his face at once, the way you know a face you've broken. Qin Bao, the very man I had beaten barehanded 2 lives ago as Yang Kai at a military review shattered his spirit sword and kicked him across a yard. Now old and faithful and guarding the last true heir of Yin with his life, he drew a profound grade sword on me, a good blade, a real one. I caught it between 2 fingers. He went white, not at the strength of it, though that was part, at the memory. Because the last time a hand had done this to him, caught his best strike like a man catching a thrown stick, it had belonged to a eunuch named Yang Kai, at a military review, a lifetime ago, right before that eunuch shattered his sword and kicked him across a yard in front of his own soldiers. He'd spent this whole life being the loyal old guard who'd once been humbled by the great Yang Kai. And here it was happening again, the exact same impossible thing, to hands attached to a face he'd never seen. "My name is Wei Chen," I told him, holding his blade still in the air while he strained against it with everything he had, and it did not move a hair. "My master was Yang Kai. You knew him, you've got very good reason to remember him, but I've surpassed him, so consider yourself lucky you ran into the student and not the teacher, because I'm the patient one. Now go and fetch your prince. I've come to hand him back his kingdom." Wen Kai did not believe a single word of it, of course. Nobody hands a stranger a throne. It's the setup to 100 betrayals. But he had just watched me pinch his best bodyguard's blade like a chopstick and hold it there. And a drowning man does not interrogate the rope. He grabs it. So I gave him his orders, which, I'll grant you, is an unusual way to begin serving a king. Declare yourself here. Now, in this city, raise the banner of Yin and call yourself its rightful king out loud tonight. He balked. He went white. He told me the city lord would crush him within the hour, that he had no real control here, no army, only a few hundred loose cultivators and a tavern. I told him that if he kept skulking in back rooms, fighting little skirmishes and picking pockets, he would die exactly that way, a rat in a wall, forgotten. And that now, with a fresh usurper newly on the throne and the country unsettled, was the exact right moment to plant a flag and give every man in Yin who hated the usurper somewhere to look. He tried to refuse me again. My aura and my eyes, and the memory of his bodyguard's caught blade changed his mind for him. "Then I'll listen to you," he said at last, and I heard it, the thing under the words. "Young man," the resentment, buried down deep but there. The pride of a prince being ordered around like a servant by a nameless nobody who'd walked in off the street. I filed it away, the way I've learned to always file away the resentment of proud men. Because it always comes back around, every single time. He raised his banner that night, declared himself king of Yin, in a tavern, in a nothing border city, to a room of a few hundred loose cultivators and one very calm stranger. It should have been laughable, a king with no army shouting a title in a bar. But that's the thing about a banner, it doesn't have to be strong, it just has to be somewhere to point. Every man in that region who hated the usurper now had a direction to march. And the city lord, exactly as I'd promised, took the bait. He sent his whole garrison to crush the tavern and the upstart king inside it, every soldier he had thrown at the loud problem in the bar, which meant his own mansion was left thin, undefended, empty of anyone who mattered, which was the entire point. I never cared about winning the fight in the streets. I cared about where the guards weren't. So while the prince's few hundred cultivators floundered in the streets against a real garrison, I walked, unhurried, into that mansion. And I killed the city lord myself in his own hall, a man who recognized the killing halberd in my hands with his last breath, recognized it as Yang Kai's, and died confused. And I spared his advisor. A cowardly, clever little man who took one look at me, standing over his dead lord with a halberd, and did not scream and did not run and did not beg. He simply quietly wet himself in terror, and then got straight to the business of being useful. "You're going to kill me," he said from his knees, in a very steady voice for a man in that condition. "That depends entirely on the next thing out of your mouth," I told him. "Then let me be useful before you decide." The city lord kept his real ledgers in the false bottom of the third chest. The garrison's loyalty is to their pay, not their prince, and their pay is 3 months late. And whatever you actually are, whatever you actually want, you're going to need someone who knows where every body in this city is buried, and I know where all of them are because I buried most of them on his orders. He swallowed. "I'm not brave, my lord. I'm not loyal, but I am extremely, extremely useful, and useful men are harder to replace than brave ones." I liked him immediately, and this time, for once, my terrible instincts about people I like were exactly right. He became one of the single most useful tools I ever owned. A fellow whose name nobody, in any of the years I knew him, ever quite managed to pronounce correctly, so I'll just call him what everyone ended up calling him: Whispering Stream. Because that was the closest anyone ever got, and because it always made me smile, and a man needs a few things in his life that make him smile. Then I walked out onto the battlefield in the streets, one man on foot walking toward an army. Bronze ghost mask over my face, a gold shield spell layered thick over my body, and I let them see me coming, and I let them decide what to do about it. What they did was panic and loose everything they had. A few hundred government soldiers emptied their arrows and their fire spells and their spears into a single unhurried figure, a storm of it, enough to bury a squad. And when the smoke cleared, I was still walking, unhurried, not a scratch on me, the arrows lying broken at my feet like dead insects. There is nothing in the world that breaks an army's nerve faster than hitting a man with everything and watching him keep walking. Their deputy general saw where this was going and ran. I let him get halfway across the square so everyone could watch him run, and then I threw the killing halberd and pinned him to the far wall with it, a general nailed up like a notice for the whole field to read. And then I used a spell to throw my voice out across the whole battlefield, huge, rolling, coming from everywhere at once, like a god speaking down from the clouds those chess players never bothered to use. "Surrender, in the name of the rightful heir, the true king of Yin. And live or don't, choose now," and they surrendered. All of them, every last soldier laid down his arms in the street. That's the difference legitimacy makes. That's the whole trick laid bare. As a slave with a blade, I could butcher an entire army and still be hunted across the world as a monster for it. As the sword of a rightful prince, I could bloody a single general and watch thousands lay down their weapons and thank me for the chance. Same blade, same hands, same man behind the mask, different story wrapped around it. I keep telling you, I'll keep telling you until you believe me because it's the truest thing I learned in 200 years. The story is everything. The usurper Ma Lei, the old schemer who'd stolen the throne, took our little rebellion seriously the moment that whole garrison changed sides. He sent 150,000 men south to crush us. I forced the terrified Wen Kai to lead them in person, to ride out at the front in his crown, where the whole army could see him. He hated it. He wanted to watch from the rear safe, the way Wen Chen always had, the way Ma Lei did. But a king who hides behind his men inspires nobody, and a king who shares the danger inspires everyone, and I needed inspiration more than I needed his comfort. The monarch dies for the state, I told him. That's the whole deal of a crown. You don't get the bowing without the risk. So he rode out front, sweating in his armor, and I stood behind him and did the actual work. I used our own troops as a moving wall against the enemy's formations, marched them in a wedge straight through the killing ground, and cut a path clear to the enemy's commanding general, Ma Lei's own son, and dropped him where he stood. And the moment their general fell, their whole grand formation came apart at the seams, the way formations do when the mind holding them together dies. Tens of thousands surrendered or fled. We crossed the river and marched on the capital. And that is when Ma Lei, desperate now, cornered, played the one card that finally showed me how big this world really was. He reached across the sea, and he hired a foreigner. Because it turned out, and this stopped me cold when I heard it, that Yin country was not the whole world. Not even close. There was more of it out past the Eastern Sea. A whole other continent, called Gui Hong, old and vast and advanced beyond anything in Yin, where cultivators organized into great sects instead of kingdoms, and where a foundation establishment master like me would be a beggar at the gate. The first real hint I'd ever had in 180 years that the cage I'd been born into 11 times was only a small, dark corner of something enormous. The man Ma Lei hired was a spirit-gathering realm cultivator from that continent. A stranded castaway named Sado, shipwrecked in Yin years ago when the sea swallowed the fleet that carried him, now selling his services to the highest bidder. And Ma Lei bid high. Sado proposed a duel to decide the whole kingdom, cleanly, 500 cultivators to a side, to avoid grinding two armies to paste. And he stood there in the field radiating a power a full realm above anything Yin country could put in front of him, and he knew it, and he smiled about it. He was also, mercifully for me, a complete idiot, because his entire strength lived in 3 precious talismans. 3. Each one a slip of paper that, torn, became a weapon that could for one moment punch above a spirit-gathering master. A spear of light, a ringing bell of force, a net of fire. Genuinely dangerous, all 3, and genuinely finite. 3 uses, and then the great overseas master was just a man in a strange robe who'd never learned to fight without his toys. He tore the first talisman early, arrogant, wanting to end the country's champion in one strike and go home. A spear of white light came at me faster than a foundation man should be able to dodge. I wasn't a foundation man. Not really. I was 180 years of one, wearing the mystic evasion I'd charmed out of a dead king 2 lives ago. I split into afterimages and let the spear pass through the space I'd just left. Sado blinked. Ma Lei, watching from his sedan chair at the edge of the field, too clever by half and understanding nothing about a real fight, called out advice. Corner him, don't let him keep circling. So Sado tore the second talisman to corner me, the ringing bell, a dome of force meant to trap me in place. I let it chase an afterimage into the empty air, and it closed on nothing and rang itself out. 2 gone. And the whole time I was drifting, arranging us, the way you nudge pieces on a board when your opponent thinks he's the one attacking. Because the 3rd talisman was the fire net, and I'd spent the last minute making very sure that when he finally panicked and tore it, I'd be standing exactly where his own spent bell force still hung in the air. He tore it. The fire net bloomed, and it caught the residue of his own 2nd talisman, and the 2 overseas powers ate each other in a blast that knocked him flat and left him, for one breath, with nothing in his hands and nothing left to tear. That breath was all I needed. I closed the distance my mystic evasion had been opening and closing all fight, and I put the killing halberd through his guard with 1/3 of my energy behind it, and it blew apart his entire right side. And it took Ma Lei's lower half along with it, because the old schemer had crept in too close to watch his champion win, and stood a beat too long inside the wrong crater at the wrong moment. 2 masterminds, 1 strike, and neither of them had ever laid a finger on me. Sado survived it, being spirit-gathering, sprawled in a crater, gloating even now that a mere foundation establishment wretch could never truly kill a man of his realm. So I walked up to him, and I killed him with the Yin King's sword. Because I could not have an outsider, a man who knew the way home across the sea, running back to a wide, advanced continent with news of a soft, backward, undefended country sitting here ripe for the taking. I burned the body, to be sure. And I let the dying Ma lay in on one last truth before he went, the truth he'd spent his whole life just outside of. That I had never murdered Wen Chen at all, whatever the histories he'd written said. That Wen Chen had died a corpse king's puppet under a mountain. And the old schemer, hearing at last the shape of the story he'd lived his whole life inside, actually died satisfied, at peace, which was more than he'd earned, but I was feeling generous. So we won. When Kai crossed the last river, entered the capital, deposed his puppet brother, and took the throne. The rightful heir restored. A hero's ending if you stop the story right there. I did not stop the story right there. And within 3 months, my rightful, grateful, freshly crowned king tried to murder me. He did it with a cup of wine, on a city wall. In front of everyone, you have to admire the staging even now. He didn't send assassins. He didn't wait for me to sleep. He gathered the whole court up on the ramparts, made a warm speech about his most loyal general, and handed me a poisoned cup with his own royal hands, smiling while the crowd applauded. It was the legendary Yin wine. A famous vintage. The stories said a single cup of it had once carried a hero straight through into the spirit-gathering realm, a priceless honor for a beloved servant. And right after I drank it, he'd send me back out to face a barbarian army raiding in the chaos. A hero's send-off, a hero's poison, and I could feel the power humming in the cup the second it touched my hand. Oceans of spiritual energy folded into the drink, more than a man should be able to hold. So I drank it, all of it in one long pull. Because with my spiritualization art, I could take every drop of that energy and refine it clean into my own, turn the poison into a tonic, drink the trap, and digest it. Which is exactly what happened. My strength surged fourfold, but I also felt the other thing woven into the wine, the real gift. A puppet control technique, ancient and subtle, the same kind of poison the old kings had used to break heroes to the throne. There was a trapped soul in there, an old winemaker's ghost, sealed into the brew, waiting to seize the body of whoever drank it deep enough. When Kai thought he was watching me swallow my own leash. I went out anyway, and I captured the barbarian king. The Kai King Wai Quan. The same one, the very same king I'd taken alive 2 lives ago as Yang Kai in the east. He came out to duel me overconfident. A strong sword cultivator, sure that this time, against a nameless upstart general, it would go differently. It did not go differently. My borrowed immortal spells barely dented him. His sword Kai couldn't cut my body cultivator flesh, so it came down to speed. And in speed, there was no contest. I closed the gap and took him by the throat with one hand. Exactly the way a eunuch named Yang Kai had once done it, in a body this man had never seen. And he knew. That was the strange, dreamlike horror on his face as my fingers closed. He didn't know how, he couldn't have known how, but some animal part of him recognized the grip. The second time in one long life that this exact humiliation had happened to him, captured barehanded and carried off like luggage, by 2 completely different men who were somehow, impossibly, the same man. I saw him reaching for it and not finding it, and I said nothing, because some things you don't explain. You just let them haunt. I carried him back to the wall over one shoulder, a king as a sack of grain, and set him down in front of the whole court. And on that wall in front of everyone, Wen Kai sprang his trap, raised his hands, formed the secret seal, and commanded the wine to take me. To seize my body, hollow me out, and leave a puppet where his overmighty general used to be. And here is what the wine's ancient trap found when it uncoiled inside me and reached for the driver's seat. It had been built to seize a young man's soul. A single lifetime, soft, unguarded, the kind of mind a clever ghost could flood and drown and wear like a coat. That's what had happened to the hero in the old legend, the one the wine broke through into spirit gathering centuries ago. He hadn't broken through anything. A dead winemaker had simply moved into his body and driven it for a while, and then both of them had died, which is why Yin never actually got its promised hero. It was never a gift, it was always a hijacking. The winemaker's ghost crawled up out of that cup expecting a boy. It found an 11-life consciousness that had died and come back 11 times, that had crushed a corpse king's illusion under a mountain, that had counted 100 years of days one at a time, and lost the one man who ever mattered and kept going anyway. It found a soul with more scar tissue on it than the ghost had ever seen on the living. I turned around inside my own head, looked down at the thing, and crushed it like an insect underfoot. And then, because waste is a sin and I am nothing if not thrifty, I refined its stolen energy into my own for good measure. Wen Kai, up on the wall, thought he was watching me swallow my own leash. He was watching me have a snack, and I looked up at my king with perfectly clear eyes. "Unfortunately for you," I told him into the silence, "for anyone else on Earth, this wine is a leash worse than any contract, a clever, cruel gift. But for me, it was just a very good drink. Strong, thank you, Your Majesty, truly." "I feel wonderful," he screamed for the guards, for the secret technique to fire again. For anything, anyone, I kicked his legs out from under him and put him down on his knees on his own wall in front of his own court. "We could have ruled together," I told him, quiet, just between us, the way I'd told his grandfather's puppet, the way it always seems to end. "I handed you a throne. I asked for nothing but to be left alone to do my work. But you couldn't stand it. You decided that a slave beneath you, fighting your wars, winning your kingdom, was somehow an insult to you, instead of the single greatest gift anyone ever gave you." And then Whispering Stream, my terrified, clever little advisor, the man who'd wet himself the day I spared him, stepped forward out of the crowd, and he took the regicide onto his own name to protect mine. And he put a sword through the last rightful heir of Yin country, and it was done. The whole court held its breath, waiting to see if the monster who just toppled a king would climb the last step and take the throne for himself. I didn't, because I'd finally understood the real trick, the deep one. The one that would serve me across every life still to come. Yin country would never, ever truly bow to a slave who crowned himself, no matter how strong, no matter how deserving. The story would always be the slave who seized the throne, and stories like that end with a hunt and 100 rebellions. But a slave who stood behind the throne, who held all the real power in his hands while a puppet wore the crown and took the ceremonies, who made himself so completely, structurally indispensable that the entire kingdom simply ran on him. That man they would tolerate, and then rely on, and then eventually come to beg to lead them openly. So I pulled a discarded, genuinely humble puppet prince named Wenhu back onto the throne. A young man with no ambition in him and a clear, unclouded understanding that in this world, in the end, strength simply rules and pretending otherwise gets people killed. He knew exactly what he was, and he was at peace with it, which made him the best King Yin had had in a century. And I took for myself a quiet, ancient, dusty title, General who pacifies the Yi. And I made it into something brand new, not hereditary, not passed down to sons a man like me would never have, passed instead on the holder's death to the single strongest cultivator in the kingdom. The court thought it was a noble, selfless reform, power handed to the worthy instead of the well-born, a beautiful gesture from a general who'd refused a crown. They praised me for it. Only I knew the truth of it. It was a door I was building carefully for myself. So that when this body finally died and I came back in the next one stronger, I could simply walk up to my own kingdom and claim my own title again. Legally, openly, with no one on earth able to object because I'd written the rule myself, and the rule said the strongest takes it, and I would always, always be the strongest. I was learning to stop planning for a life and start planning for lives. I gave myself 30 years to build, and I did not build the way kings usually build. I reformed the cruel southern slave laws first, the breeding control, the casual killings, the whole rotten machinery of the place I'd been born into a life ago. Because I had not clawed my way up out of a wheat field on a mountain of my own dead lives just to sit at the top and preside over more wheat fields full of the same misery. The southern nobles howled about it. Their whole economy ran on people they owned outright and killed for 10 copper coins. I did not especially care about their howling. I'd been on the other end of that arithmetic for 100 years, and I'd done the sums from down there, and the answer was always the same. I let the slaves marry and have children freely, and instead of culling the surplus the way the old laws did, I shipped it out to settle the empty frontier, turning barren borderland into more of Yin, more farms, more towns, and yes, more soldiers, because a man building an empire is never entirely a saint. But that was the thing the southern nobles could never understand, choking on their own greed. People are not a cost to be minimized. They are the whole point. A country is not its land or its treasury. It's the number of people in it who'd rather it kept existing. I built a new army, chosen on talent alone, slave-born or noble-born, no difference, no questions asked about your blood. And I reopened the spirit-mind monopoly to pay for all of it. And while Whispering Stream spent those 30 years building the kingdom, I spent most of them sealed away building myself. Because the puppet King Wenhu, grateful and unambitious and clear-eyed, had handed me the one thing 30 years of ruling from the shadows couldn't buy on the open market. The Yin King's own secret library. The real one. Not the minor books Ma Lei had copied for himself, but the royal collection, the national treasures, the two profound high immortal techniques that Yin had guarded for centuries. A fire art. And a lightning one. The limitless mystic lightning, the personal technique of King Wenhui, the single strongest ruler Yin ever produced, 400 years dead. A man half the histories quietly suspected had actually reached spirit gathering before the ceiling swallowed him like it swallowed everyone. It took me 17 years to master that lightning. 17 years in the best cultivation chamber in the country, burning through a fortune in spirit stones, learning to call down a thing that hadn't been wielded properly since a legend died. And when I finally had it, my immortal cultivator power quietly surpassed even my body cultivator power, which I would once have called impossible. And outside, in the daylight, 30 years of Whispering Stream's work bore fruit I could see from the palace wall. The reformed South, no longer culling its own people to keep the numbers down. A coastal frontier that had gone from 1 million people to 3 new towns, new ports, empty borderland turned into more of Yin. And a merit army, the Ghost-Face Army, 10,000 strong, chosen on talent and nothing else. A slave's son fighting beside a duke's, worth 20 times their number of ordinary troops. I'd learned, somewhere in all that, the lesson the modifier had been trying to teach me for 180 years. Infamy pays, but glory pays better, and building something pays best of all. And when it was all finally ready, 30 years of quiet work standing behind me like a loaded spring, I marched west. To conquer. West, to the barbarian slave kingdoms and the ghost tribe, and the road that opened beyond them to whatever else this world was hiding. Because I was starting to suspect, hard, after what Sado had let slip before he died, that Yin country was not the top of anything, that it might not even be the middle. I came back to court after 30 years away to settle the direction of it. Sat on a general's seat beside the puppet King Wenhu, who deferred to me the way a boy defers to a grandfather, and let Whispering Stream, gray-haired now and grown into real power himself, lay out what 3 decades of quiet work had bought us. 200,000 Imperial Guards, and 10,000 elites of the new merit army, the Ghost-Face Army, chosen on talent alone, worth 20 times their number in ordinary troops. The debate was east or west. East meant the Kai King again, familiar, close, already half broken. West meant the barbarian slave kingdoms and the ghost tribe and the long road past them, toward the civilized empires, and maybe, the answer to the ceiling that trapped us all at foundation. I chose West. When a royal ghost-faced general stood up to argue for the easier eastern road, I leaned on him with a whisper of that fake, fathomless aura until the whole court went pale and quiet, and I nearly flattened poor Wenhu by accident along with him. Nobody argued after that. West it was. Word of it ran ahead of me, and it reached the ghost tribe first, and the ghost tribe reacted in the single most sensible way anyone reacted to me in 3 lifetimes. Their king, an old man named Bai Lei, 102 years old and a genius in his youth now worn down to a nervous vassal, heard that the heir of Chen Long and Yang Kai, the man who'd captured the Kai king barehanded, was marching his way. And he immediately, without hesitation, tried to surrender. To me, before I'd so much as crossed his border. His own advisor had to physically talk him out of writing the letter and pitch him a better plan instead. Let the 2 tigers, meaning me and the barbarian slave king, tear each other apart first, and then have the ghost tribe stroll in and bow to whichever exhausted tiger was left standing. It was a good plan. It even half-worked in that the ghost tribe survived. It just didn't account for how little tearing apart I intended to do. Because the tiger they were counting on to bleed me was the real problem. The barbarian slave king, Feng Lin, was the real thing. Not a pampered noble, the genuine article. They called him the #1 man in all of Kyushu, and he'd earned it. Never once defeated in a long and violent life, wrapped always in a strange black armor carved all over with dragons that he never took off. Not to eat, not to sleep, not for anything. He met my 500,000 with a formation out of legend. 10,000 water cultivators, moving as one, who conjured a 3,000-foot waterfall out of a clear blue sky and turned the entire battlefield into a churning swamp in the space of a minute. It came down like the sky itself had broken, and it swept away my whole front rank, 20,000 men, gone, drowned in mud in the time it takes to shout a warning. And Feng Lin laughed up on his hill and called out that he'd been saving that particular trick for a bigger enemy than me, for the great empire at the center of the world, but that I'd have to do. I could not break that formation with strategy. There was no clever wedge, no general to kill, nothing to cut. It was just 10,000 men and an ocean. So I did the thing that made the histories remember this life instead of the last one. I sent my own army to the rear. All of them, every man, back out of the water to the dry, high ground. And I stood alone in the flood, up to my knees in the swamp they'd made, as bait. And I let the enemy see one man standing there, and mass around him, thousands of them wading in through their own beautiful flood to finish the fool who hadn't run. And then I called down the limitless mystic lightning. The legendary technique of the single greatest king that Yin country ever produced, 400 years dead, a technique I'd spent 17 years alone learning to wield. I called it straight down into the center of a battlefield that the enemy had very helpfully turned into one enormous, unbroken conductor of water. One strike, 70,000 of them died in a single heartbeat. The lightning ran through the flood in every direction at once and took everything standing in the water with it. Feng Lin's decades of work, 10,000 water cultivators and the army massed around them, gone in the time it takes to blink. Even a few of my own stragglers who hadn't cleared the water in time went with it, which is exactly why I'd sent my army back first, why I'd stood alone. You don't call down the sky with your friends still standing in the puddle. His elite 6 guards came for me through the smoke, 6 masters who fought as one, said together to be able to kill a spirit gathering. I turned their own soul illusion back on the man casting it and dropped all 6. And then Feng Lin himself came down off his hill, and he was, genuinely no exaggeration, the finest fighter I had faced in 12 lives. Everyone else I'd ever fought had a tell, a rhythm, a weakness I could find inside the first exchange and then exploit for the rest of it. Lord Hu was weak. Duan Chen had never fought up close. Sado leaned on his toys. Feng Lin had none of that. He read me perfectly, every feint, every afterimage, every dirty trick I'd collected across 200 years, saw through all of it, and was already moving to the counter before I'd even finished committing to the move. I'd throw a feint with the halberd and pull the real strike with the sword, the exact trick that had killed a corpse king, and he'd already be inside it, punishing the sword before it landed. He negated my body, my speed, my whole style, and then he punched clean through my golden shield and made me feel real pain, actual physical pain, for the first time in that entire life. I started, somewhere in there, to genuinely enjoy myself. It had been a very long time since anything could hurt me. It's a strange gift, meeting someone who can, like being reminded you're alive by the only man in the world capable of ending you. But even the best fighter has to breathe, and Feng Lin didn't. That was the thing that finally stopped me mid-exchange and made me look at him properly. Round after round, and he never slowed, never tired, never so much as caught his breath, while a fight like this should have been draining a spirit gathering master's reserves like a punctured cask. No man has bottomless stamina, not one. Until I realized his impossible, bottomless stamina wasn't his at all. It was the armor. So I reached into my inventory, and I simply took it off his body, mid-fight. Mid-exchange. A zero-frame theft, no cast time, no gesture, no animation, no incantation, no possible way on earth to see it coming or stop it. One instant the black dragon armor was on him, and the next instant it was in my pocket, and the #1 man in Kyushu collapsed to his knees in the mud, exhausted, gasping, suddenly near naked and near empty. Because he'd forgotten how to fight without it. Decades wearing a thing that did half the fighting for him, and he'd let the skill of doing it himself quietly rot. The system named the armor for me as it slid into the slot. Dragon Emperor Battle Armor. It held a mindless combat spirit inside it, thousands of years of another man's battle experience, ready to drive the body of whoever wore it. I kept it. Obviously I kept it. You do not put back a thing like that. I spared Feng Lin, because he'd handed me a gift without ever meaning to, and because a live #1 man who owes you is worth more than a dead one. And he swore himself to me, not to Yin country, not to its puppet king. To me personally, the same way the Kai King had, the same way they always seem to in the end. The Ghost Tribe King folded in right behind him, shameless, mocking the naked Feng Lin even as he knelt. 3 nations, suddenly family. And where 2 lives ago, as Yang Kai, I'd had to behead a general in front of his own men just to stop the looting of one single city. Now a single word from me stopped every soldier in 3 armies from touching a single village. Not one door kicked in, not one field burned. That's what power actually buys you in the end, not the freedom to do more evil. Everyone thinks that's the prize, and it isn't. It's the freedom to finally actually stop it, to say no and have the whole world listen. But it was the armor that pointed me at the truth, because Feng Lin, kneeling there, told me where he'd looted it, a place called the Dragon Emperor Ruins. In the heart of the continent. In the great new Dragon Empire, a nation richer and older than Yin, built on the bones of the old immortal capital, that hoarded those ruins and forbade anyone, on pain of death, from ever exploring them. And if there was one single place in all the world that might hold the secret to breaking past the ceiling that trapped every cultivator in Kyushu at Foundation establishment, the invisible wall none of us could climb over, it was there. So I gathered the 4 eastern nations under my hand, and I marched on the new Dragon Empire. The new Dragon Empire was rich, and old, and rotten all the way through in a way Yin had never had the money to manage. Their nobles didn't cultivate anymore. They'd given up on it entirely, decided the foundation ceiling was as high as anyone got, and there was no point straining for a door that wouldn't open, and spent their days instead burning through immortal stone, drinking, writing poetry about how sad it all was. Their unbreachable border wall, the Yangyu Pass, 500 kilometers of stone with 100,000 men garrisoning it, was commanded by a man who was, when I arrived, in a brothel. I broke it in a single day. Alone, mostly out front in the Dragon Emperor's own black armor, halberd in one hand and lightning coming down and fire rolling ahead of me, while my 4 armies came up behind to hold what I took. The unbreached wall breached before sundown. The garrison commander, who'd been in a brothel when I arrived, was trampled to death in the rout by his own allied soldiers, all of them stampeding for the wealth of a country that had forgotten how to defend itself. Feng Lin watched me take the wall and just shook his head, because even the #1 man in Kyushu had never seen anyone fight a war the way I did, standing alone at the front of it like a man who genuinely could not be killed. Which, of course, I could not. Not permanently. That's the whole cheat. The new Dragon Emperor, a preening man named Emperor Lu Song who'd started this whole war mostly to distract from a succession crisis at home, insisted on a grand detour to the Dragon Mountain to sacrifice to his ancestors before facing me, because a man like that would rather lose a kingdom than skip a ceremony. So I ambushed him on the way to his own prayers. And that is where his own prime minister handed him to me. Zhu Wei, the strongest cultivator in the new Dragon Empire, and it turned out, the most quietly disgusted. He'd watched his nation rot from the inside for decades, watched his emperor write poetry while the world sharpened its knives, and when my army closed the trap, he simply stepped across the line and urged his own emperor to surrender. And then he told me the thing that changed the whole campaign, that the Dragon Emperor Ruins Feng Lin had looted his armor from was an empty shell, a decoy. The real Ruins, the one worth dying for, the one every emperor of New Dragon had hoarded and guarded and forbidden anyone to enter, was hidden elsewhere in the heart of the empire. And it was guarded by 4 corpse puppets of the spirit-gathering realm, the kind that don't die, the kind that had killed every hero who'd ever tried the door. I cowed Emperor Lu Song with a whisper of that fathomless fake aura, and Zhu Wei saw straight through it. I could tell, and chose to play along anyway because a defector bets on the winner, and I was very obviously going to be the winner. I left the too weak, too comfortable Ghost Tribe King to sit on the captive emperor, and I took a small party inward, the 4 of us who could actually survive the trip, toward the real thing. And I fought my way inward, past the decadent capital, to the real, hidden ruins. Not the empty shell Feng Lin had looted his armor from. The true one deep in the heart of the empire, hidden behind mist, guarded by 4 corpse puppets of the spirit-gathering realm. The same kind of endlessly regenerating horror I'd killed under the mountain as Lei Su, but 4 of them, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a great stone door. And scattered at their feet among the moss and the dust were skeletons. Old ones. Heroes who'd come before me, chasing the same answer, and died here at this door. And 2 of them I learned from the fragments and the grave marks were names I knew. the founder of Yin country, and its single greatest king, the one whose lightning I'd spent 17 years learning. Both of them had come to this exact quiet place, chasing the exact same answer I was chasing, and both of them had died on this doorstep for it. That should have frightened me. Two of the strongest men my country ever produced, dead on this exact doorstep, chasing this exact answer. It just made me curious. If the front door had killed the founder and the legend both, then whatever was behind it was worth the trip. Zhu Y, my helpful defector, would not go first. Surprising no one, he'd guided us here and then found urgent reasons to stand well back, because a man who bets on the winner does not put his own body between the winner and 4 spirit-gathering corpse puppets. So I went first, alone into the 4 of them. And I already knew the shape of this fight, because I'd fought its smaller cousin under a mountain 2 lives ago. These were the same horror Lei Su had been. Bodies that carve like flesh and then hiss into black smoke and recondense a heartbeat later, whole, patient, tireless. One of them I could have handled. 4 of them moving together meant that every time I destroyed one, the other 3 were already tearing at my back while it reformed. It was a fight you cannot win by hitting harder. There's no bottom to a well you're trying to empty with a sword. But I had the one thing Xian and the Founder King hadn't, the inventory. So I stopped trying to kill them and I started trying to file them away. Carve a limb loose with the Yin King sword, and in the half-second before it could dissolve and rejoin, sweep the piece into the inventory, into a pocket of reality it could not reform out of. A hand, then an arm, dodging the other 3 on afterimages the whole time, taking hits I could eat, losing a piece of skin here and there, and putting the puppets away one carved chunk at a time, like a man disassembling 4 clocks that were actively trying to strangle him. It took a long time, longer than any honest fight would have. But there is no cooldown on a pocket, and there is no reforming out of one, and eventually there was nothing left standing at that door but a scatter of harmless rolling stones that couldn't remember how to be monsters, and a very quiet defector staring at me like he'd made a serious miscalculation about which side of the door to be on. And I pushed the great door open, and behind it there was no treasure. No hoard, no golden hall. Just a stone platform, one glowing book resting on it, and a ghost. Not the Dragon Emperor, his master. Who old, near-ascension cultivator named Su Chong, a spirit worn thin by 1,000 years of waiting. And he told me the truth about the cage I'd been born into 11 separate times. The Dragon Emperor, he said, whose real name was Lu Yudai, had not simply ascended to godhood the clean way, the honest way, the way the legends sang. On his way up to secure his own ascension, to make sure no one could ever follow him or challenge him, he had done something monstrous to the entire continent. He had exterminated Kyushu's cultivators, all of them, every rival. He'd wiped every last true spirit stone out of the land, leaving only the weak scraps we fought and died over. And he'd locked a great formation over the whole of Kyushu that severed the true path to immortality and sealed the continent away from the outside world entirely. So that no one could ever rise the honest way again. So that the only men who could still break through the ceiling were the evil ones, the soul devourers, the corpse cultivators like Lei Su, dooming the whole land slowly over centuries to rot into a demon's playground. My whole world. Every kingdom I'd bled across for 180 years. Every mine, every palace, every battlefield. All of it was a sealed jar, a backwater by deliberate design. A place a god had broken on purpose, on his way out the door, and then walked away from without a backward glance. And suddenly, 100 things I'd never understood clicked into place all at once. Why Kyushu had no real spirit stones like the dense ones from that far-away continent. Why no one, not one cultivator in centuries, could break past foundation. Why the founder of Yin and its greatest king had both died on this exact doorstep, chasing this exact answer. Why the whole world I'd suffered in for lifetimes had always felt so unbearably, inexplicably small. It was small. On purpose, because a coward had sawed the ladder off at the very bottom so that men like me could never, ever climb it. Su Chong offered me his own stolen family technique. The incomplete dragon transformation art, the very art the false dragon emperor had stolen from him on his way to becoming a god, along with his title, along with everything. A technique of a grade nothing in all of Kyushu could match, in exchange for 2 promises. Break the god's formation someday from the outside and set the jar open, and tell the world the truth about the false dragon emperor. That he was no god, that he was a thief and a coward and a butcher who'd murdered a continent to buy his own way up. I took the book, and I understood finally, standing in that quiet stone room with a dead man's technique in my hands, that if I ever wanted a real answer, a real ceiling, a real fight, an actual top of the mountain instead of the inside of a lid, I was going to have to get out of this jar entirely. Cross the sea, reach the wider, older, crueler world that a frightened god had sealed me away from 1,000 years before I was ever born. But that was a problem for a future life. This one still had a promise to finish, and a board to take. So I finished it. I took the whole board. I didn't burn the new dragon empire down. A man who wants to rule the world does not want to spend the next century governing a pile of rubble and hunting survivors through the ash. So I broke it instead. Split it, bent its emperor into abdicating, and left the pieces standing as vassals, kings instead of an emperor, grateful to still have thrones at all. And then, kingdom by kingdom, the fragmented West fell in line behind me, most of them surrendering before my army even crested their horizon once they understood the one thing that mattered about me, that I only wanted them to bow, not to burn, that a bent knee bought a whole city its life. I did not want to own the world the way a greedy man owns things, hoarding every acre, garrisoning every town, choking on the cost of it. I wanted to sit at the top of it as the thing that settled arguments, the final court. The last word? Let the kings keep their thrones and their headaches and their tax collection, and let them all understand that above them sat one man they did not want to make come down off his mountain. It's cheaper, it's stronger. And it left me free to do the only thing I actually cared about. Quietly collect every immortal stone the continent could produce, the dense good fuel of that other, higher world, against a journey across the sea I already knew I'd be taking in some life to come. The 4 resisting kingdoms that wouldn't bow, I broke, and made examples of, so the bowing ones would keep bowing. The savage south I handed to Feng Lin and the Kai King, who were hungry to make names for themselves now that they'd given up on immortality and had nothing left to chase but glory. The barren north wasn't worth the walk, so I left it barren. And the 4 eastern kings, the men who a few short years earlier would gladly have died to put my head on a spike, draped an emperor's robe over my shoulders and begged me to take the title. I refused it 3 times. The way you're supposed to, the way the story requires, and then I let them win. Great emperor of the 9 provinces. The whole of Kyushu, from the eastern sea to the western frontier, from the barbarian south to the empty north, bowed to one man. And that one man had opened his eyes, 180 years earlier in a livestock pen on a straw mat, next to 5 other slaves whispering about being eaten at the border. As an ant, the system's own word for me. Ant, I built my new palace at the dead center of the continent, right on top of the ruins where the truth was buried, where a dead master's ghost still waited in the dark. And I built something else right beside it, the Emperor Sect. A school that took disciples on talent alone. Slave or noble, free or branded, it didn't ask and it didn't care. No birth, no bloodline, no family name, just ability and the will to use it. The exact opportunity that had been denied to me, and to every single person I had ever watched die in the dirt across 180 years. So that a slave child with a gift would never again have to creep into a young master's room and murder him in his sleep just to steal a scrap of a technique off his shelf, the way I once had. I opened the door wide for everyone. The same door I'd once had to break down with my own bloody hands. And they came. That was the part that got me quietly in the years after. They came in from every corner of the continent, the branded and the freeborn both, standing in the same line to be tested, and the tortoise-shell diviners of my new sect didn't so much as ask whose son you were. There were boys in those first classes who'd been swinging a pickaxe in a pit, exactly like mine 6 months before, who now sat in clean robes learning arts that kings had once hoarded behind locked libraries. I'd walk the grounds sometimes and watch them, and I'd think of a crack in a wall and a bucket of raw ore and a young man who'd once said to a stone, "Time I enjoyed a little treasure the slave owners can't even afford." And here was a whole school of them doing it in the daylight legally together, and nobody was going to whip them for it. I told you right at the start that I'd made a promise once, watching them strip an old man and whip him for output. That someday I'd burn all of this down. It took me 180 years and 11 deaths. But I didn't just burn it down. I built the opposite of it in the ashes, and I put a roof on it, and I opened the door. And then I ruled, for a long, long time. I settled disputes between kingdoms that would once have gone to war over them. I hunted down the evil cultivators, the soul leaders, the ones the gods' broken formation had left as the only men who could still break through, and I put them in the ground before they could rot a province. I taught at the Emperor sect, and in every lesson, per the promise I'd made a ghost in a stone room, I told my disciples the truth about the false dragon emperor. That he was no god. That he was a thief and a butcher who'd murdered a continent to buy his own way up the ladder and then sawed the ladder off behind him. And I watched everyone I'd climbed with grow old and die, one by one while I stayed. Wai Quan went first, the old Kai king I'd captured twice across 2 lives. He died bitter, cursing at the ceiling. The dragon emperor ruined me, because he'd finally understood at the end that there had never been a real breakthrough waiting for him, that the ceiling he'd spent his whole ferocious life throwing himself against had been nailed shut on purpose before he was born. Then Whispering Stream, my clever, cowardly, indispensable little advisor, the man who'd wet himself the day I spared him and then run a kingdom for me for 40 years, and taken a regicide onto his own name to protect mine. I handed the real administration back to Wen Hu's line when he passed, and I felt that one, more than I expected to. Then Feng Lin, the #1 man in Kyushu who'd knelt in the mud and sworn himself to me and become, of all things, something close to a friend. And I stayed and stayed, emperor of everything and a little more alone with every funeral. That's the part of infinite lives the arrogant gamer on the straw mat never once thought about. You don't just outlast your enemies. You outlast everyone who ever sat at your table. And I had learned, a long time ago in a rotting mansion, exactly how much a single chair at a single table is worth. I'd spent this whole life quietly building a hall full of them. And then I sat in it at the end and watched the chairs empty out around me, one at a time, the way they always do. And then, one ordinary morning, I felt it. The familiar weakness creeping back into my limbs. The one I'd felt in a collapsing mine and in a dead king's stone chamber and in a lonely little house by a river. And I knew the account was about to settle again. I'd known the year of it since the day I was born into this body, the way I always know. I just hadn't known which morning. So I called them all in. The sect master, my disciples, tens of thousands of cultivators, a whole continent's worth of the gifted and the risen, gathered in the great square below my window to see their emperor off. And here is the one thing I let myself feel at the very end of that life. The one small, warm, private thing that I didn't undercut, that I didn't wave away with a joke. 2 lives ago, I had died as Yang Kai, alone, in the corner of a small house south of a river, so completely unimportant, so utterly forgotten, that my own dying body had scratched at the floorboards before it went cold, and not one single living soul in the whole world had noticed, or come, or cared. And now I was dying as the great emperor of an entire continent, with an ocean of people kneeling in the square below, weeping openly, thousands of them, asking the silent heavens how a man like this could possibly be allowed to die. From an ant that no one would bury, to an emperor that a whole world mourned. That is the distance I had crawled, on my hands and knees across 11 lifetimes, through every mine and palace and battlefield. That is what one slave did, starting over and over again with an endless string of the worst starting hands the universe could deal, and a cheat that paid 1 single point a year. They asked me at the last who should inherit the throne, and I gave them the answer I'd built the door for decades before in another life on a city wall over a dead king's body. The strongest, I told them, and my voice barely carried now. Whoever proves that he is the strongest shall be the next great emperor of the 9 provinces. Then I closed my eyes, and I turned my head toward the window and the weeping and the light, and I let go. And the modifier settled the account, and the numbers had grown so far past anything I could have dreamed, lying on that straw mat in the barracks, that I almost didn't recognize them as belonging to me. Survival 183 years. Fame across all of Kyushu, remembered in every history and every legend and every secret record the continent kept, plus 3,500. Peaceful death on my own terms, in my own bed, points doubled. And the achievement dominating the 9 provinces, plus 1,500. Over 6,000 experience points, from a single life. And I understood, finally, the deepest truth of my own cheat, the one it had taken me 180 years and 11 deaths to learn. It doesn't reward killing. It never did. I'd wasted a whole early century trying to earn points with a knife. It doesn't reward grinding either, 1 sad drip a year. It rewards mattering. It rewards being a man the world cannot stop talking about, for good or for ill, hero or monster, so long as it can't look away. And I had finally mattered. But I'll tell you the one thing I did not feel. Kneeling there inside my own dying body, while an entire continent wept for me, and the numbers rolled up higher than any man had ever scored. I did not feel finished. Because I knew now what none of those weeping thousands in the square below could ever know. That the whole magnificent empire I'd built, the entire world they thought was everything, the sky and the sea and the 9 provinces, was a broken jar. A jar a frightened god had sealed shut on his way out the door, 1,000 years before any of us drew breath. That there was no real ceiling here to climb, because a coward had sawed the ladder off at the very bottom rung. That somewhere across an ocean I had never crossed lay a wider, older, crueler world. A place where I would be a nobody all over again. A foundation establishment ant among old monsters. And that the answer to every question I had ever asked in every life I had ever lived was over there. Past the seal, past the sea. I had been a slave who became an emperor. Fine. Good, it was more than the ant on the straw mat ever dreamed of. But I hadn't chosen reincarnation all those lifetimes ago, sleep-deprived and arrogant and so sure of myself, to become the emperor of a cage. I chose it to see the top of the mountain, and I had just found out that the mountain I'd spent 180 years climbing was only a hill. A pretty little hill, inside a walled garden, and that the real mountain, the true one, was on the far side of a wall that a god had built for the specific purpose of making certain that men exactly like me could never, ever reach it. So as the light went out, and the crowd's weeping faded to a distant sea sound, and the words came, the words that had felt like a curse for 100 years and now felt like the only promise the universe had ever actually kept, I made a decision. A new one. A bigger one than I'd ever made lying in the dark. Next time, I was not going to be content ruling the jar. Next time, I was going to break out of it. Initiate reincarnation. And why Chen, the ant, the slave, the eunuch, the general, the great emperor of the 9 provinces, closed his eyes on the only world he had ever known, and went looking for the sea.